A sudden swing, and a cruel blow cut across her back. In the center of this slaughter stood a black blade that swallowed even the light, and the air was pierced by a desperate scream calling out for Arena. It all started with the younger sister, who ran out joyfully, thinking their father had come. Next fell the older brother, the pride of the family and the first knight. With a furious roar, the older sister called the enemy a freak and rushed at him with a heavy mace. The boy, in tears, shouted that he was also a knight and charged forward. Then the memories faded. Only the sound of his fingers crunching on the hilt of his own sword remained. The white-haired boy with an eye patch weighed in his hand a blade, glowing with a bloody red light. Before him stood a bone demon, but the youth was used to being a player who fully commits to his role. Wrapped in a dark aura, he stood opposite the monster and mentally admitted, in any game, he remained true to his role until the very end. The air trembled from the strike. Powerful purple flashes tore through the space. He confidently strode through this chaos with a predatory smile, not regretting his extreme play at all. Suddenly, red beams pierced through his body. Dazzling pillars of energy mercilessly struck from above. Blood splattered. All his confidence vanished the moment he entered this game. The sword slipped from his weakened hands, and he helplessly fell backward into oblivion. In his head, irritated curses raged about this damn situation. He coughed up blood, not understanding why he had to endure this real, tearing pain at all. He lunged at the giant bone monster, although in this harsh reality, he just wanted to have a little fun. His strength was exhausted, and the boy barely stood on his feet, leaning on his sword. His boots slipped in puddles of his own blood. The monster's skull mockingly grinned, wondering how he was still standing in such a miserable body. Purple tentacles loomed over the swordsman, demanding that he finally die and stop resisting. The enemy continued to press with words, but the youth's wounded fingers only clenched the hilt until it cracked. Gritting his teeth, he muttered that enough of this play acting. He wants to get out of here. His eyes flashed with a predatory light, and his face twisted with rage. I want to go home! His desperate scream tore through the space. At that very moment, the weapon exploded in a pillar of destructive energy. A bloody whirlwind soared to the skies, and then reality faded, replaced by a digital loading screen. The system coldly announced the completion of loading and confirmed the user's login. Blue holographic interface circles unfolded before his eyes. On the dazzling white screen, a greeting flashed, hiding the real name, and the bloody memory covered him again. The white gifted dress instantly turned crimson, and above the dead girl loomed the shadow of the killer. The man lunged forward, shielding the frightened boy with his body. In the child's dilated pupil, the moment was forever reflected when the blade cut the defender's neck. Following him into battle stepped the elder sister, who took over his title. On her face froze a wild snarl of rage, mixed with bitter tears. The boy fell to his knees amid splashes of blood, completely paralyzed by horror. All sounds instantly drowned in pools of blood. Through the noise broke a desperate scream of the mother. Someone sharply pulled him by the collar, begging him to run. The woman pushed him back. He did not even see what she was holding, a kitchen knife or the father's sword. But ahead, blades had already crossed in an uneven fight with a dark silhouette. No! At least you save yourself! Her last cry sounded. It seems that at that moment, the father burst into the room. The boy froze when the monster with one blow slashed the man's chest. The world before his eyes was flooded with a bloody crimson. Then everything faded to a dazzling white, and again plunged into darkness. Wounded, drenched in blood, the boy struggled to gasp for air under the cold light of the full moon. A foreign blade still protruded from his right arm. It pierced the forearm through and through, tearing the flesh with crimson flashes of energy. Suddenly, heavy footsteps sounded. The boy fell to the ground helplessly. His vision darkened. From the darkness emerged a shadowy entity with a predatory smile. To it, he was a perfect vessel. The boy's eyes widened with primal horror. A desperate no burst from his lips as a demonic hand reached out from the darkness. The monster croaked that he would turn into something exceptional. A black paw cruelly clutched his throat. The entity desired this body above all else. A bloody tear rolled from the boy's eye as the shadow consumed his soul, the very one meant to defeat evil. The steadfast knight bowed his head before the giant demonic skull in the face of evil. His sword flared with bright flames, the weapon of the only man capable of defeating the demon. From the eerie, bloody darkness came a desperate plea. An unknown voice asked the void if it could hear him. A sharp noise instantly cut off the vision. The eye opened wide in panic, and a hoarse breath escaped from the throat. The young man with two colored hair and bandages on his face greedily gulped air as if he had just emerged from that world. Above him stood an irritated man and rudely demanded to get outside. The boy looked back and saw that he was sitting in a covered cart in the middle of the noisy Tatar trading post. He only remained confusedly silent, and then suddenly sprang to his feet, causing the coachman to recoil in fear. The space around was unexpectedly outlined by a green-dashed barrier line. Without saying a word, the boy briskly passed by the outraged stranger. A heavy military boot firmly stepped on the cobblestones. Some peasant clicked his tongue, throwing a contemptuous "loser" at his back. He did not even slow his pace, no emotion on his scarred face. But inside, the boy was simply screaming with delight. The immersion was 100%. In his pompous cloak and with an armored hand, he looked formidable, although in reality, he barely restrained a silly smile. The footsteps sounded realistic, and the introductory video seemed to him like a piece of his own past. Even here, in the ordinary starting zone, the sense of presence was overwhelming. The local NPCs bustled around, just like real people. He desperately wanted to dance in the middle of the street, but a doubt arose. Could he maintain his grim image with such emotions? This was a game that launched only today, and this noisy trading post served as the training zone. 15 years ago, the original game was shut down too quickly, but now it was revived in VR, and the devoted fan finally awaited his time. The young man froze, raising his gaze to the sky. After all, he was a true conceptualist, who played his role to the end. Covering one eye with an armored glove, he smiled pompously, squinting from the dazzling light of the local star. The white-haired youth snorted discontentedly. He played simply for fun, and categorically denied any hints of the eighth-grader syndrome. But his sly smile and the prepared tablet revealed otherwise. He was eager to show off his idea. He proudly demonstrated a hand-drawn sketch of the pompous class Devil Knight. The character's story turned out to be extremely tragic. A demon who slaughtered his family now resided in his right hand, nourishing the body with superhuman strength and waiting for the moment to seize the mind. A huge horned monster grinned bloodthirstily right from behind his back. A step into the darkness. He convinced himself that any loss of control would lead to the death of all the innocent around. And the scariest thing, they would be killed not by a stranger's blade. His own cursed hand would do everything. Because of this fear, he forced himself to become an outcast, constantly waiting for the inner evil to finally consume him. The young man theatrically grabbed his face, bending from feigned pain. A lonely, unstable soul behind a mask of sharpness. Suddenly the gloomy aura burst. The boy joyfully shone, incredibly proud that he had spent a lot of money on this luxurious cloak and metal hand. Meanwhile, in reality, he just froze in the middle of a crowded square in the most ridiculous pose, while passers-by whispered with disgust, wondering if he had sat down here out of necessity. The hero drove away unnecessary thoughts. The time has come for a real playthrough, but what to do next? He raised his eyes to the sky, waiting for the usual quest window to appear. But there was only emptiness. No minimap, no system hints. Could it be that he just had to stand and wait for the right NPC to approach? And he didn't have to wait long. Timidly, a boy spoke up from behind, asking about the Devil Knight. An awkward silence hung in the air. The hero feverishly waited for the dialogue options window, but the system was silent, so he had to improvise and simply confirm his identity. A light breeze stirred his hair. "Lead the way," he said coldly. The boy flinched fearfully at that tone, and asked nervously about the guild. The boy turned around and nervously led the fearsome mercenary after him. The hero was genuinely impressed by such caution. The boy behaved exactly like a real living child. Walking along the cobblestone street, he observed the townspeople and was amazed. No rehearsed scripts, only instant reactions in real time. No matter how perfect this world seemed, it was all just a game in the latest VR capsule, whose technology made a crazy leap forward. A man in a long coat entered the room with heavy steps, causing the young messenger to recoil in fear. The stranger sharply leaned forward, blinking with his only open eye. They found themselves in the noisy guild of adventurers Tatari, where the boy loudly reported that he had brought a mercenary. The hero mentally admired the crazy graphics, down to the feeling of real planks under his feet. Looking at his silver armor, he ironically thought that the developers probably kidnapped aliens for such visual technologies. At the counter, he was greeted by a friendly administrator. The girl looked closely at the guest. She introduced herself as Isrin, and unmistakably recognized him as the famous Devil Knight. According to the guild rules, she asked him to present his token. Suddenly, a system inventory window popped up right in front of the boy's face. He cursed mentally, since with one eye such huge holograms blocked the entire view. Waving away the awkward menu with his hand, he gave a crooked smile. The developers had still made a purely human mistake in the interface. As soon as he extended the token, Isrin confirmed his identity and immediately moved on to the urgent task from the client. The boy with the massive armor on his arm nodded to his companion to prepare. They stepped over the threshold. Although he knew the plot by heart, there was still a flutter of nerves before the long-awaited training quest. A stern, bald elder stood before them. The old man from the threshold insulted them. With such sinister faces, it was impossible not to recognize them. The girl screamed in fright upon recognizing the head, but the boy only rejoiced. For an ordinary NPC, the old man had an unusually tough temper. Since this was just a program, they could have a verbal battle without guilt, because the quest and training would be given 100%. The old man fiercely raged at their silence, while the girl panicked, begging him to choose his words. He smiled boldly, choosing the perfect reply, and he lazily informed the old man that his tongue did not know what politeness was. A pause hung. Those present stared at him in confusion. Embarrassed, the young man nervously scratched the back of his head. A troubling thought flashed through his mind. Why do soulless NPCs react with such genuine surprise at all? The space around suddenly flooded with swirling purple magic. Behind the head appeared a terrifying shadow with burning eyes, and the boy, feeling a chill down his spine, realized his fatal mistake. Under the cold sky, he was overwhelmed by a belated realization. He should have understood everything back then. He sincerely did not understand what an ordinary NPC would be afraid of. The knight with an eye patch stood impassively before the old head and his assistants. While old Mabel dryly called him to follow, to reveal the details of the order, the hero mentally waited for at least some system window about the start of the quest. The girl nervously asked again if he really agreed blindly, although the young man himself knew perfectly well. If the game plot requires it, you have to do it. However, in his soul, he was already celebrating, because for a fan of role-playing games, such realistic emotions were a real gift. Roleplay is also content. He sharply changed his tone. The assistant turned pale at his cold question. Could those he was going to cut down really be dangerous? His figure was enveloped in a heavy crimson aura. The eye gleamed predatory in the darkness. Pathetic bugs? He said contemptuously, making the girl swallow nervously. After which the old man hurried to get down to business. The second assistant fussed, trying to ease the tension, while Mabel grimly told about the workers who had vanished without a trace in the city sewer. The young man nearby added information from those who had gone down to scout afterward. Deep underground, demons had made their lair. Gloomy green creatures bared their fangs in the darkness of the dungeon. The old man had no illusions that the missing workers were still alive. Their mutilated bodies had long been floating in the dirty sewer water. The task was simple, but deadly. To clear the demon lair and collect the belongings of the dead, on which all previous hunters had failed. The gray-haired client scrutinized the mercenary, openly doubting that such a weak young man was even capable of wielding a sword. The hero with the eye patch ignored the insult, confusedly waiting for the usual quest game window to finally pop up before him. Not waiting, he arrogantly ordered not to compare him with weaklings, and called the mission a banal pipe cleaning. Such audacity instantly threw the old man off balance, and the assistant had to forcibly hold him by the shoulders. Seeing such a vivid reaction, the boy nervously broke out in a sweat. However, he quickly calmed himself. Better the local characters be too humane than to hear the real player's mockery about their pompous roleplay again. As soon as the agreement was made, the assistant immediately began drafting the official contract. She raised the pen over the paper, asking for the exact number of casualties. Her partner gloomily lowered his gaze, while the mercenary continued to stand impassively with crossed arms. It turned out that 13 people had died, and he was allocated a month and 2 days of bonus time for the long journey to clear the area. The young man mentally exhaled in amazement. Everything here worked exclusively through live dialogues, immersing him in absolute realism without any system hints. The task promised a full 400,000 gals, but the extortionate commission cut the amount down to 380. The girl clerk beamed happily while he was drenched in sweat from shock. The reward for training was huge, but losing a percentage still hurt. With a dead look, he handed over the signed papers, feeling a sharp emptiness inside, as if he had just been brazenly robbed. The clerk happily pressed the contract to her chest and brightly asked to report the success to her personally. He set off on his business, when suddenly a familiar system chime rang out. A bright panel began to unfold in the air. The quest window ordered to clear the sewer of demons and find 13 lost items. He mentally cursed the developers who hid the mission details until the very moment of signing the deal, but he frankly liked such hardcore. A satisfied smile appeared on his face when the guild provided a free hotel and a personal guide. A tall, gloomy official instantly appeared nearby. He handed over a worn paper dungeon map with red enemy markers, which became an excellent analog of a mini-map. The dark-haired man looked at him seriously, fully relying on his abilities in this task. In the interlocutor's gaze, sincere anxiety for the person who might not return was read, but the voice remained firm. So speaks one who fulfills their duty to the end. The hero mentally noted how detailed this NPC was crafted, and stepped forward with nervousness, as if before going on stage. He firmly decided, since he had already taken payment for the task, failure was not an option. Heavy metal bars screeched as they slid upward. Blinding light struck his eyes as he decisively crossed the threshold. A plea from the client to deal with the demons, which had become a constant headache, echoed behind him. The boy silently passed him by into the dim corridor. With a sharp clatter, he drew the true two-handed sword of destruction, a weapon that sows absolute terror. One powerful sweeping strike, and the grotesque rat was torn in half in bloody splashes. The blade heavily fell onto the dead carcass. All the grandeur instantly evaporated. The hero panicked when he realized that from a single light tap, the sword's durability had already dropped to 1. Realizing that in the narrow sewer, the huge blade would only be a hindrance, he took out a replacement. With a whistle from the sheath came a classic long sword, a reliable weapon with perfect balance. Feeling fully ready for the hunt, he mentally commanded himself to move forward with childlike enthusiasm. His face instantly became serious, and the blade coldly gleamed in the semi-darkness. The armored glove firmly gripped the handle, raising fine dust into the air. He headed to the dungeon, and the guide nervously exhaled behind him. The young man really turned out to be as terrifying as they said. The man watched him intently as he went. Of all the demon hunters he had seen, this boy impressed him the most. The guide wondered if his combat skills would be the same, watching the figure finally swallowed by the dark gates. Time passed, and in the impenetrable darkness the hunter grinned fiercely, rejoicing in the filthy demonic breed. An emerald flash cut through the first monster, while the young man mockingly asked the bugs not to stop the attack. A short whistle of the blade in the darkness. Dozens of green beams tore the corridor to shreds, instantly grinding the entire crowd of monsters into a bloody mess. The green flash of the sword sliced the monsters in half, flooding the space with fresh blood. His red eye coldly flashed in the darkness. He muttered dully that he would send those monsters back to where they crawled out from. The severed head of the goblin fell with a dull thud onto the stones. The victor disdainfully hissed that this was deadly boredom. A system window with the results of the bloody cleanup immediately flashed before him. Looking at the pile of corpses, he sincerely wondered how past adventurers died from such a trifle. And then he sighed heavily. All the pathos instantly evaporated. The swordsman comically grabbed his head, almost crying over the lack of loot. Now it was clear why so much money was paid for this training quest. Nothing dropped from the local mobs. Out of offense, he terribly wanted to personally search the bodies of the killed, but he had to restrain himself because a suspended boy was watching him closely. A few quick swings of the blade accurately cut through the thick vine. The freed boy flew down with a frightened scream. An armored hand sharply caught the child's boot in midair. The blonde swordsman casually held the boy upside down by one leg, while he barely squeezed out a thank you. A system window popped up before his eyes. Choice recorded. Child saved. He silently examined the boy, recalling his younger sister from the game's intro video. The harsh class settings struck his mind again. The demon who killed her now lived in his own body. The memory of the girl's death painfully stabbed his consciousness. But this time he saved at least someone, so he extended his hand, allowing himself to soften his cold image a bit. But the movement immediately froze. Petting a child with a metal-clad demonic paw was a bad idea. Fingers clenched tightly into a fist. Protecting the weak remained his nightly duty. The boy calmly looked at his savior. The swordsman sighed, impressed by the terrifying realism of the game, when suddenly the boy directly asked what he was doing here at all. The boy confessed guiltily that he had come down here alone, because his mother went to clean the sewer and did not return. Their silhouettes silently reflected in the dirty water of the dungeon. The hero sternly cut off, saying that the boy should wait for the adults, although in his soul he was already torn by sympathy. The child sadly lowered his gaze. Unable to bear it, the swordsman tenderly scooped the boy into his arms, barely holding back tears from such a drama. They moved past the slashed monsters, and the hero calmly asked the child to stop apologizing. He showed the found items. Among the bloodied tools and bones, the boy instantly recognized his mother's belongings. The boy sobbed so wildly that he quickly ran out of strength, and the swordsman had to take him in his arms. Throwing the exhausted child under his arm, he walked and wondered, could this NPC really be played by a real live actor? The mind perfectly knew that this was a fake, but treating this grief as a game was already impossible. He carried the boy away down the gloomy corridor, rejoicing at least that all this was not real. At that very moment, a window flashed before his eyes. The location required immediate cleansing by holy power or flame. The system directly demanded that demons never again set foot on this land. At that time, he did not yet know how bitterly he would later regret not reading this message more carefully. Would I regret even a little less? Flashed in the darkness against the background of desperate screeching. The frightened young man lost his voice, frantically begging for help. The guild commander sharply darkened at the news of a signal flare launched nearby. His pupils narrowed with anxiety. The red color indicated a critical number of wounded and required immediate intervention. At the launch site, under the crimson glow, a sprawled, bloodied body was already lying. Nearby, covered entirely with wounds, another fighter barely held himself up on his elbows. On his battered face, absolute horror was frozen. The surviving boy pressed himself stiffly against a tree, looking at the mutilated comrades. A dry wheeze burst from his chest. He tightly pressed his hand over his mouth, barely holding back a wave of nausea from the bloody slaughter around. The boy regained consciousness only after crawling out of the sewer, bitterly consoling himself with the thought that his mother was now happy beside God. But if God did exist in their world, it was the game administration. The grim adventurer silently agreed. The little one wiped away tears, desperately hoping for the admin's mercy, while the warrior silently marched forward. In the guild building, they were met by a surprised employee. The girl immediately recognized the worker's son, who had recently descended into the deadly sewer in search of his mother. The adventurer dryly advised to ask the boy personally, and abruptly handed her a rough sack. The burden weighed almost like a child. To the confused question, the warrior matter-of-factly replied that these were the collected belongings of the deceased. The employee turned pale with horror, realizing she was holding the remains of 13 people. The man looked away. He hastily waved off, entrusting the guild to deliver the find to the clients for identification. Untying the rope, the girl froze. The sack was crammed full of gold tokens of fallen adventurers. Her gaze warmed. The girl pressed the sack tightly to her chest and bowed low, warmly thanking on behalf of the entire guild. Meanwhile, the hero irritably gutted the monster corpses, grumbling about the damn realism without convenient item markers. He sighed. Hearing such sincere gratitude was pleasant, although this new virtual reality technology gave him goosebumps. The girl cautiously inquired whether the hunt was over for today. The boy tilted his head in confusion, not understanding why she suddenly suggested he take a rest. What rest, if he had spent all his savings on a capsule for continuous play, for days without sleep or food? Suspecting she was hinting at some hidden quest chain, he directly asked what was the point of going back into that hole again. A suspicion flashed in his mind that it was about a cleansing task. He himself had come out only to avoid damage from suffocation. He thoughtfully pressed his lips together. So the guild wants to dump this job on him as well? The girl broke out in a cold sweat and cautiously asked, did he really manage to cut out absolutely all the demons in the sewage? The woman pressed the saved bundle to her chest with relief. She was noticeably trembling, asking again about the child, while the hero was sincerely surprised by her panic after such a quick cleanup. His gaze suddenly darkened. Such neglect was unpleasant to him. The woman almost twisted the bindings, desperately shaking her head in denial. She hurriedly apologized to the adventurer and promised to take care of the infant. After asking the client to wait, she left, and the guy meanwhile decided to check his stats. With one sweep, he unfolded the system. The interface flashed a notification about a quest in the sewage and a request to talk to the client. A heavy sack with 400,000 galls thudded onto the table. The hero mentally scolded the developers for such realism. Now money was given exclusively for quests. 15 years ago, everyone got rich from monster drops, but now one had to be glad that the guild at least took the commission upon itself. The dark-haired client opposite added that they would gladly buy trophies from demons at a good price as well. This detail made the hero think. He remembered the crafting skill of skinning, which could also be a good source of income, but quickly dismissed the idea. Combat skills still remained a priority. The young man with an eye patch smiled smugly. He grimaced mentally. From defeated enemies fell pitiful pennies. Instead, he was pleased by the skill branch that he, as a true role player, strictly developed according to the chosen concept. Since the game was single-player, he could freely choose the development path and not depend on a team. The young man squinted with pleasure. To get even more cool abilities, he needed to level up faster. He took the pouch with the reward from the old client and dryly said that it was time for him to go. Suddenly, he sharply turned around. A window about quest completion suddenly popped up before his eyes, making him twitch amusingly. From behind the door came a panic scream, to which the old man angrily snarled, and the young man only mentally assessed the realism of the local NPCs. A frightened subordinate flew into the room with a plea for help. He blurted out that a signal flare from their trade guild had just been fired nearby. The old man stared in shock upon learning that the capital guard was too slow and simply would not arrive in time to help. The young man calmly assessed the situation. The game gave no rest and immediately threw the next quest. The guild leader fiercely ordered to send his people to the rescue and rudely pointed a finger at the hero, demanding that he go with them. The old man furiously snarled, stubbornly refusing to go without his prepared phrase. The boy only sighed contemptuously and advised in an icy tone not to give him orders. The old man trembled with indignation and pointed a finger at him, shouting that he would pay generously for this order. The deal was made, and the swordsman headed for the exit, throwing the stunned administrator to prepare the papers. A system window instantly flashed before his eyes. He received a quest to rescue people, with a bonus for each survivor. He brushed off the idea of waiting for mercenaries and ordered the guide to lead him straight into the thick of the battle. The quest conditions looked ominous. It was a tough timed run where every second cost lives. Someone from the crowd shouted that the hero single-handedly cleared the sewer, causing the old man to stare in shock. The guide jumped up and hurriedly announced that they were leaving immediately. The horses were waiting nearby. The guide hurried after him, and the boy confidently said that there would be no problems with horseback riding because he was a pro even in simulators. Seeing the rider, he joyfully shouted and triumphantly raised his fist up. Moving forward, he mentally begged the enemies for one thing: to live until his arrival and give him their precious experience points. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a terrifying crow's caw. The sky over the battlefield turned blood red, and a black flock of birds rose up, foretelling a massacre. With a sharp push, he lifted off the ground, raising a pillar of fire. The explosion tore through the night forest. The man with the bandage sharply inhaled, licking the blood from his lip. In his thoughts, he wished victory to his own sword. The crimson blade sliced through the space with a whistle. The screech drowned in a fountain of blood. With one devastating strike, he cleaved the goblin in half. From beneath the bloodied strand flashed a predatory gaze. Someone among the survivors desperately shouted praise to the heavens. But the soldier's relief instantly turned to horror as he realized the reinforcement was only one person. A whole pack of scaly monsters was already advancing on them. Fending off, the young man forcefully thrust the burning torch straight into the monster's maw. But at that very moment, a gigantic weapon descended with a whistle above him, shattering hopes of survival. The unknown figure was suddenly thrown back by a devastating flash of crimson energy. The man with black and white hair and an eye patch landed heavily on one knee. He instantly pushed off the ground and rushed forward rapidly. The warrior, at a mad speed, charged toward the monster-surrounded caravan, asking if they were the ones who requested rescue. His shining sword pinned the creature to the ground, dead center, before the shocked, light-haired youth's face. The wounded man barely squeezed out a frightened question whether the savior would fight alone, but he coldly promised to destroy all enemies before the boy bled out. With one sharp movement, the swordsman drew his weapon. The air around instantly heated up from a powerful red aura. The warrior's surviving eye filled with a predatory gleam. "I will tear you to pieces, worms," he roared madly, fully unleashing his rage. A bloody wave of energy spiraled into a gigantic, deadly whirlwind. Dozens of lightning-fast strikes mercilessly pierced the battlefield. The goblins' bodies were instantly chopped into bloody pieces, leaving them no chance. A vertical strike of bloody energy sliced the creature's body in half. Dark hair fluttered, and from behind the shining blade flashed a predatory gaze. Darkness swallowed the alley, and two beaten peasants with a torch fell to their knees in horror before someone's heavy boots. The silver-haired stranger smiled eerily, radiating a dense, dark aura. "This man, a monster?" One of the youths squeezed out in a trembling voice. The warrior in the black cloak silently towered over the pile of torn bodies under the crimson sky. A wave of his sinister power instantly spread across the world. Far from here, the red-haired warrior sharply froze, feeling this invisible blow. She had just been informed of the order to set out at dawn tomorrow to the Tatar trading post. She only asked again why, clearly sensing a powerful demonic threat in the air. Her emerald eyes narrowed anxiously. The youth with the eye patch indifferently spat out blood, examining the system window with the count of surviving people. He calmly wiped the blade and grimaced mentally at the disgusting taste of torn monsters, while the rescued man behind trembled with gratitude. A frightened scream about the erosion of demonic energy instantly broke the silence. The swordsman sharply squinted his eye. The system immediately helpfully reminded. Any monster attack had a chance to infect the victim. One of the wounded was unlucky. He fell to the ground, choking on foam, and his body began to be devoured by dark corruption. The infection rapidly transformed a person into a new monster. The peasants desperately called for medicine, but only had a sedative on hand. The hero only rubbed his bloodied cheek, barely recalling this cruel mechanic. Each missed hit from the demon relentlessly filled the death gauge. He completely forgot about such a threat, since, thanks to his class, he himself was a walking vessel of darkness, with absolute immunity. But since the generous quest reward directly depended on the number of survivors, he had to intervene. The hand habitually plunged into the spatial inventory. A heavy vial with a saving green potion flew straight into the hands of the confused peasant. Someone hesitantly spoke up. The boy could not believe his own eyes. In his hands was a rare elixir against demonic madness, and he murmured a trembling thanks. Antidotes, sedatives, and bandages flew like hail into his open palms. The crowd instantly came alive. People rushed noisily to save the wounded and those affected by erosion. The young man with the eye patch only smiled, finally understanding why the system had given him so many items at the start. Before him glowed the quest window, where the survivor counter was fixed at 27. Suddenly he sharply turned his head, hearing approaching footsteps. From the darkness of the forest emerged riders with torches. Reinforcements had arrived, and the survivors sighed with relief. The system announced the successful completion of the quest with a victorious chime. The swordsman thought tiredly that it was finally over. Suddenly, a new notification popped up before his eyes, making him blink in surprise. The second phase began. Now it was required to collect 25 corpses and an unknown number of abandoned items. He silently froze, digesting the new order. The role of a cleaner on the battlefield seemed extremely undignified to him. The rescued man looked sideways, exhaustedly, and blood still darkened his cheek. Thick fog enveloped the night forest. He indifferently leaned against a tree, noting with satisfaction that the actions of ordinary NPCs also counted towards his quest. While he observed detachedly, two men were dragging a stretcher with a body, quietly resenting his arrogance. They irritably glanced his way, muttering about the cheeky one who just stands with folded arms and stares. Meanwhile, he barely restrained a creepy smile. How sweet it is to rest while these digital dummies do all the dirty work. Nearby, someone felt a bad premonition, while he continued mocking, that before him there were still only NPCs. Suddenly, one of the peasants broke the silence, complaining that he had never seen such a disaster in the West. He instantly paid attention to this. Such detailed dialogues from the crowd were definitely a hook for a new plot, especially since a few bodies were missing at the battle site. The companions exchanged surprised glances, not understanding where the dead could have gone. But he sharply closed the topic and ordered to return to the city. While the crowd was whining about high taxes and the local lord's inaction, he was gloomily analyzing the situation. The lack of corpses meant only one thing. Demon worshippers or warlocks had been at work here. A premonition suggested that a large-scale hunt for the culprit was ahead. But his thoughts were interrupted by a loud call to move out. His gaze sharply intensified. The system message recorded success. The mission was completed, bodies and belongings collected. The boy calmly exited the night forest to the rescued people and commanded to move out. The gray-haired client greeted him with a sparse praise. The mercenary immediately demanded payment, to which the old man indignantly ordered him to wait, saying he had plenty of money. The guild leader abruptly turned around. His staff loudly struck the floor, a new task appeared for the youth. The old man's face became stern and focused. The assistant was confused, as there were no urgent hiring tasks at the moment. But the leader clearly voiced the goal: to destroy the demon in the northwestern forest. A shocked subordinate peeked out from behind. She reminded that other adventurers had already been sent there, and the old man irritably barked that there had been no news from them so far. The girl shuddered at the shout, while the client raged that he would wait no longer and would send this proven fighter himself. The mercenary only smiled inwardly, feeling sincere sympathy for this quarrelsome but caring old man. With a confident smile, he clarified the contract details and agreed to the job. The tired registrar sighed resignedly and agreed to immediately issue them the task. The fate of the previous mercenaries did not concern the hero at all. He boldly demanded to be paid a penalty. The dark-haired guild representative awkwardly cleared his throat and offered to escort them to lodging. They headed to the exit, postponing all explanations for the road. A new day dawned. The bright morning sun flooded the horizon. A system notification about a journey to the northwestern forest popped up before the hero, and he silently set off there in a carriage. The trip turned out to be unbearable. He was angry that the developers of this damn game had thought to implement even numbness of the legs from sitting too long. 10 hours of shaking without a single skip button drove him mad. The boy caught himself thinking, why is he even playing his role here so diligently? The only consolation was the little coachman, who looked at him with delight. The hero was not going to offend the cute NPC. He had to grit his teeth and endure this road in anticipation of a generous reward for the official contract signed at dawn. Although the employer assured in the hotel the previous evening that there was no rush, he still very much asked to catch the target as soon as possible. A solid reward was set for the head of the target: 700,000 gallons. In his mind, the hero almost screamed from shock at such a profitable quest. But the client interpreted his silence in his own way and nervously threw in another 200,000 from his own pocket. The young man only blinked in surprise. His negotiation skill was at absolute zero. The bet increased by itself. He tried to understand whether this was a hidden script from the original, or if the local system allowed bargaining at all without skills. Unable to endure the long pause, the employer finally gave up and panically threw in another 300,000. Inside, the boy was bursting with happiness, marveling at his sudden talent as a true rich man. The deal was closed, and he immediately turned towards the exit. The client tried to persuade him to rest, at least for a day, but the young man sharply cut him off. He would not delay with demons. His gaze remained cold and focused. A white flash. And now the crew was already rolling along the sunlit streets of the city. And inside, the ruthless demon hunter carefreely dreamed of buying elite real estate as soon as he reached the maximum level. He grinned with satisfaction, imagining a heavy chest of gold coins before him. "Sir, you are an adventurer, aren't you?" timidly sounded nearby. He glanced indifferently at the blonde boy in the carriage and cut off, saying he joined the guild purely for money. What kind of adventurer is he? He is more of a wandering avenger. Noticing the boy's fear, he immediately slowed down and asked what he wanted to find out. He listened attentively. The boy asked hopefully about the sea, and the hero was mentally moved. The game developers made the child NPCs remarkably lifelike. He casually compared the sea to the boy's blue eyes and wavy hair, causing genuine admiration in him. The carriage peacefully rolled toward the northwest forest. He did not expect at all what happened moments later. Frightened birds suddenly took off into the crimson sky. A deafening clatter of metal and a burst of sparks shattered the silence. He barely managed to block the weapon, from which an angry cry about the betrayal of the gods sounded. The red-haired warrior, with fury in her eyes, swore to punish him in the name of her lord. The red-haired woman screamed fiercely, pouring the last of her strength into the massive metal artifact, which flashed dazzlingly. "I will meet her," the unwavering promise echoed in his head. The man with the eye patch walked alone through the eerie crimson forest. The footsteps echoed dully in the silence. Suddenly, he froze. A system flashed before his eyes. The search skill activated, allowing him to unerringly sense foreign hostility. He smiled fiercely, as he was just thinking about how long he would have to hunt demons in these endless thickets. The red window instantly notified him of a target within a 10-meter radius. He was surprised that everything happened so quickly, until suddenly he heard an enraged voice accusing him of betraying God. Out of nowhere, a colossal blade of a white sword grew before him. The enemy stepped forward heavily. With a fanatical cry, "In the name of our Lord," the attacker delivered a devastating blow, flooding everything around with blinding light. With a lightning-fast movement, the man drew his black blade, preparing for the attack of an unexpected opponent. His gaze instantly sharpened. His fingers clenched the hilt with a crunch. The red-haired paladin put all his fury into a new wide swing, forcing the hero to sharply dive under the shining arc. The crimson blade descended with a whistle, carrying the promise of cruel punishment. He barely managed to block the strike, gritting his teeth against the heavy blow that rapidly shattered the strength of his sword. Sparks flew in all directions as he forcefully pushed the knight back. A sudden closing of the distance. Breathing heavily, he looked intently at the attacker and asked if she was really from the Order. The girl with fiery hair coldly cut off, saying she came to deliver justice upon him. He froze in confusion. Throwing his sword over his shoulder, he inquired since when the merciful priests had turned into bandits who attack people. From such words, the girl flared up with a dazzling holy light and exploded with rage. Her voice thundered with indignation. How dare a demon even speak about violence? The word demon filled the entire space with an intrusive echo. He silently lowered his weapon, pointing a finger at his own chest. He blinked confusedly. What demon? Calculations flashed through his mind instantly. There is no active quest. This is not an event. So why on earth did this priestess even classify him as a monster? He was checking his inventory when suddenly a dark silhouette of a demon emerged from his shoulder and greeted him cheerfully. The boy became embarrassed, sharply recalling his own possession. His gaze fell on the heavy plate gauntlet he wore out of disgust for the cursed hand. And then a cunning idea flashed in his mind. He was always gnawed by doubts about his own humanity because of this darkness inside. But now it was the perfect chance to play the role of the wronged. He shouted fiercely at the fanatic, not to dare call him a demon. The blade of the sword sharply rose against the backdrop of the bloody sky. He pompously pressed the blade to his face, swearing to bring victory to the heavens. The red-haired warrior lost her temper. Her eyes flared with indignation that the renegade dared to pose as a knight. A dazzling flash of light burst from her weapon. She rushed into attack, shouting about holy punishment. But at that very moment, she herself was harshly thrown back. The boy calmly hung in the darkness, mentally agreeing. He was really only playing a knight, since officially no one had knighted him. His single eye flashed fiercely from behind the sword blade. Throwing aside any nobility, he instantly vanished into the darkness, leaving the bewildered opponent to scream fiercely into the void. The blade was enveloped in mana as the Destroyer activated, a mass damage skill. With a wild roar, he unleashed a pillar of dark energy. The red-haired knight barely managed to scream as a wave of violet flame tore through the ground. The girl pressed herself firmly into the soil, taking the devastating blow on her full-body shield. He slowly stepped forward, mentally mocking how she had shrunk back like a turtle under its shell. But she fiercely flashed her eyes and promised to cut off his head as a sacrifice to all the victims. Her mace suddenly shone, making him wary. Buff or attack? The space cracked from a sharp flash. Shouting that God was with her, she raised the weapon to the heavens, completely enveloped in a divine aura. He had to shield his face with his hand from the unbearable light. From under his palm, he analyzed the foreign ability with open envy. It turned out to be a total buff to defense and attack for the whole body. While the knightess rushed into the attack, he dryly calculated the numbers. Due to class compatibility, her damage should have increased by 1.3 times, making the skill truly overpowered. The shining mace thundered down. He slid aside from the wave of light, realizing it was not a direct strike, but a large-scale zonal cleansing. The red-haired priestess took the blow on her giant shield. The heavy class critically lacked speed for direct combat. He unleashed a hail of fierce blows on her, striking dark energy, but the absolute defense blocked everything. The swordsman clicked his tongue irritably. Realizing the futility of a frontal attack, he retreated while the priestess boldly challenged him to an open fight. With a fierce roar, she sprang from her place and rushed forward. The one-eyed man flashed his eye predatory, catching her in her words. The girl struck with her massive shield with a swing. The weapon struck with such force that dazzling sparks flew in all directions. A satisfied smile flashed across the priestess's face, but instead of dodging, the swordsman skillfully leapt right onto her shield. Her heavy armor turned into a trap, leaving her body completely exposed after the swing. Pushing off, he soared high into the night sky against the backdrop of the full moon, raising his blade for a fatal strike. The girl stiffly raised her head, realizing her mistake with horror. The white-haired warrior with an eye patch snarled fiercely at the enemy that this is the end. Fanatic! His fierce scream tore through the night silence. He swiftly leapt from above and unleashed a devastating spear strike on the red-haired knight, carving streaks of bloody lightning. The girl barely held the shield, painfully gritting her teeth against the furious pressure. The devilish knight did not give her a second to breathe, swinging his weapon again. Thanks to top attack speed, his strikes merged into a continuous, deadly whirlwind. The warrior looked at his victim with blatant, mad excitement. He decided to punish her for her long tongue, and suddenly unleashed a powerful flame. A pillar of roaring fire struck the knight, driving her into a dead end, as she did not expect a magical attack in close combat at all. Suddenly, someone's foot in a blue mantle quietly stepped onto the grass. A calm voice promised that, although late, help would come. From the darkness emerged the archmage, a majestic white-furred lioness werebeast, with a shining staff in her hands. The red-haired girl instantly shone with joy, while her one-eyed opponent gloomily froze. Feeling a powerful support behind her back, the knightess confidently straightened her shoulders. The young man with the eye patch froze in complete confusion. With a skeptical squint, he asked again if those really had the third professions of priest and mage. The puzzle suddenly came together. He would have to fight an elite combo of a healer tank and a long-range damage dealer. The red-haired knightess silently caught her giant shield and shining mace. The boy resignedly threw back his head, feeling like an absolute noob who had just been released from training. His gaze darkened, and his hand tightly gripped the blade. He stood before his companions with a red sword piercing through his head, refusing to believe this absurdity. Cold sweat ran down his neck as he mentally screamed about the cruel bullying of a newbie. Passing the trial was as realistic as breaking an impregnable mountain with an ordinary egg. He vividly imagined himself as that doomed creature, forced to painfully die against a stone wall. Such a finale made him tremble slightly. That was frightening, not even pain, but an inevitable penalty for death in the game. He gloomily froze, trying to find a way out. A sudden guess struck like an electric shock. What if the developers planned to kill him from the very beginning? In this crazy system, death could have been just a gameplay mechanic. The logic was ironclad. You die in hardcore training, and only after that, the system unlocks the pass and convenient features. All this sadistic realism existed only so that the player would feel discomfort firsthand. An imaginary light bulb flashed above his head, and a happy smile lit up his face. He mentally thanked the creators for the game. He relaxed, closed his eyes, and accepted his end without a trace of fear. He thought it was the perfect chance to say everything and do it beautifully. The young man only sighed heavily. Instead, accusations poured down. He was called a scoundrel who made a contract with a demon. The red-haired knight fiercely raged, defending her archmage. Suddenly, a system flashed before her eyes. An enemy target appeared very close. He tensed sharply, waiting for enemy reinforcements. The silence was broken by a predatory hiss. From the darkness of the forest, a giant blood-red snake body loomed over him. A thought about Medusa flashed, but the lion-like mage suddenly protested that his phrase was stolen, completely breaking the tension of the moment. The knight burst out screaming again, branding the young man a traitor for supposedly bringing his friends. He coldly glanced over his shoulder. A voice from the darkness promised first to tear the demon apart, and then to rip the jaws of all blinded by divine light. From the darkness emerged a giant snake with burning eyes, looming over the Inquisitor. It was Medusa, a monster made up of hundreds of small snakes, which at the first sign of danger scattered, hiding the true core. He exhaled with relief. The boss's appearance at this moment meant it was a regular plot event, and the game developers did not just decide to stupidly kill the players. What a huge beast, he assessed mentally. His face stretched into a wild, excited smile. I grant you death, his confident verdict sounded. The red-haired companion behind screamed in panic, begging him to stop. The lioness werewolf nearby only closed her eyes resignedly, preparing for the worst. But the Inquisitor had already rushed forward. By the game rules, he would have to chop through this mountain of scales for a long time, until the small bastard scattered and revealed the real target. However, his Korean impatience demanded a quick resolution. He gripped the hilt tighter, and the blades sparkled with powerful magic. If the physics of this world is so realistic, then the main snake's hiding place is too obvious. A devastating flash of red energy sliced the monster with a swing. Blood splattered. A precise strike instantly cut the tiny red snake in half, finishing off the boss with one move. The light blade sliced through flesh with a swing, splashing crimson. The snake coiled around his arm, but with a mad look, he already found its weak spot. Bingo! He found the true heart of the monster. For the perfect strike, he released his only sword from his hands. Blood-red energy whipped through the air, and the hand lunged forward. A bare fist cracked through the scaly body. He triumphantly raised the severed head of the red snake above himself, dripping with blood. The headless body shattered into pieces, and the system registered the kill. The sword remained lying on the ground as he slowly straightened up in the middle of the eerie forest. Now the real hunt began, and the surviving creeps hurriedly crawled into the darkness. A heavy boot stepped forward, approaching the small snake. The soul mercilessly crushed the fugitive, pressing her into the ground. He moved on, cold-bloodedly leaving behind only torn corpses. The boot heavily sank into a puddle of blood. The beaten young man barely stood on his feet before the red-haired inquisitor and the beastman mage. The bloody blade rattled as it scraped the ground, making the enemies tense. Could this fanatic still fight? From the darkness came his muffled voice. He praised the pair for not meddling in others' affairs and not hastening death. Despite terrible wounds, the boy slowly straightened up. From beneath the wet fringe flashed a terrifying gaze, and he kindly offered to tear their mouths as a reward. The black background was cut by a bloody inscription. The tension instantly vanished when hurried apologies for the attack and a request to listen were heard. The young man coldly asked what misunderstanding the archmage was talking about, making the beast woman nervously sweat. The mage revealed a frightening truth to the inquisitor. This boy did not make a pact with a demon, but simply brazenly appropriated its power. The girl turned pale from shock and desperately demanded explanations. The werewolf woman grimly replied that such anomalies are mentioned only in theory, even at the academy. Meanwhile, the young man was casually crunching popcorn, openly enjoying how pompously they discussed him in the third person. To them, he looked like a terrible, rotting monster with a purple aura, although in reality, he was just smugly playing his role. The off-screen voice confessed in shock. The young man single-handedly suppressed the demon and seized its power. Until now, this was considered impossible without direct intervention from the gods. The face of the red-haired knight tensed. With cold sweat on her forehead, she sharply told the inquisitor that in this world, nothing is impossible. The white, lion-faced man calmly closed his eyes and added, "Impossible is only what people refuse to believe." Otherwise, there was simply no way to explain the survival of this bloodied boy. The young man coldly cut off their chatter, asking if his presence bothered them. The voice from the void hurriedly apologized and promised to fulfill any wish of the warrior. The boy just snorted, mockingly suggesting that they would again offer him a pathetic couple of coins and starter armor. He inquired whether they would cut out their tongues if he asked, and only confused mumbling was heard in response. With a bloodied sword in his hands, he aggressively moved forward, ordering them to shove their empty apologies far away. Breathing heavily, the young man hissed that he would gladly tear their jaws off, but he did not want to stoop to the level of demonic kin. He sharply turned around, sheathed the sword, and briefly ordered them to get lost. This whole pompous drama was enthusiastically commented on by two boys, rejoicing as if at a student play, and praising the artificial intelligence for flawless acting. One of them grinned foolishly with delight. He walked away, mentally glad that his bad temper worked well, only thanks to the reactions of these NPCs. The step abruptly stopped. The boy almost forgot to take the corpse. His bloodied hand grabbed the massive scaly tail, but a short request to stop came from behind. He squinted irritably, expecting another complaint about his trophy. With a swing, he threw the carcass right in front of the knight, and brazenly declared that the newbie needed it to complete the quest. The girl stared at him in shock, but she quickly composed herself and firmly asked to be heard. He slowly turned around, and all the pretended foolishness instantly disappeared, giving way to the cold, piercing gaze of the single eye. At that very moment, a notification about a new quest flashed brightly in the air. The red-haired inquisitor suddenly changed her expression and resolutely declared that she also had to apologize. She froze in surprise before the battered and bloodied swordsman. The boy dryly apologized for his attack, wondering mentally why this elite NPC did not guard his pride. After all, just a minute ago, she was fiercely calling him a dishonorable monster who profits from demon corpses. And now she humbly bowed her head, sincerely and fervently begging for forgiveness. Such a sudden change made the boy feel awkward, and he awkwardly scratched the back of his head. He conciliatorily attributed everything to game settings, but the girl suddenly offered monetary compensation as well. The swordsman became wary, suspecting that the game had triggered a hidden companion recruitment event. He did not need partners. It completely broke the roleplay of his character. Deciding to keep his distance, he sharply turned away and threw in an icy tone that he did not need her hypocrisy. The girl, stunned, tried to justify herself, but was cut off by a calm foreign voice. Behind them appeared a white lioness beast woman, who reminded the inquisitor that the cleansing was complete and it was time for them to return with the report. The girl instantly darkened. She quietly, with noticeable regret, agreed. Someone in white armor was hastily walking through the night forest, calling companions to hurry. They were a red-haired knight and a tall lioness beast woman, who were following behind the bloodied swordsman. His heavy steps thudded dully into the ground. The beast woman silently walked behind. Suddenly the young man stopped and irritably glanced over his shoulder. His clothes and huge blade were completely covered in foreign blood. The boy could not understand why this strange pair stubbornly followed him closely. He was checking the virtual map while heading to the village, and had no idea whether the pursuers were following the same route, as they were carelessly discussing their work. The female knight was chirping with a smile about divine duty, while the boy was boiling with tension in his mind, sincerely not understanding what else they needed. A bloodthirsty thought even flashed in his head to attack first, to check if there was some hidden quest here. His patience ran out. He coldly reminded them that he had already ordered them to get lost. The young man sharply turned around, ready for conflict, but instead of drawn weapons, he met only polite apologies. The werewoman raised her hands conciliatorily and explained that they were simply following a magical guidepost, and their paths had coincidentally crossed. A hologram of the route flashed in the air, and the swordsman realized he had been worrying for nothing. The bloodied young man realized that the pursuers were not after him, but after their own navigator, and understood. They also had a map window. Saying that it was time for him to go, he indifferently turned towards the forest, but the red-haired female knight sharply called out to stop. Her gaze tensed. She added that the forest was dangerous only for people like him, to which the boy retorted not to judge him by himself. Bleeding, he trudged away and mentally asked the system to respect his concept, ignoring warnings about the foolishness of night wanderings. The knightess asked the archmage in confusion whether it was safe to let him go just like that. The silhouette of the young man dissolved into the darkness, and the girl thought with horror about the disaster that would happen if this strong warrior was consumed by a demon. The archmage admitted that he himself was in such a situation for the first time. He thoughtfully rubbed his chin. Noticing that desires often differ from reality, the archmage confessed that she had already placed a tracking spell on the boy and suggested simply observing. They remained standing on the magic-illuminated forest path. The archmage quietly wished the young man God's mercy. The gloomy forest finally swallowed the fugitive. A flock of crows ominously circled above the treetops, against the backdrop of a huge full moon. The thick fog slowly melted in the air. A deep night fell over the city. A dark silhouette with a sword on his back trudged heavily toward the door. The girl with the broom turned at the sound and guiltily asked the late guest to wait with the new orders. Suddenly she shuddered sharply. From the darkness, a blood-soaked face with a single cold red eye looked at her. She recognized with horror the devil knight, who only dryly ordered to check the brought loot. A tied, bloodied sack thudded onto the table with a dull thump. The girl asked confusedly why he had returned so quickly. She nervously recoiled from his gaze, but immediately hurriedly got to work. With trembling hands, she unfolded the fabric, suspiciously examining some strange snake carcass. Her eyes climbed onto her forehead, and a frantic scream burst from her chest. She openly broke into a shriek, not believing that he had hunted a real demon in just 2 days, while the swordsman only smiled, tiredly, mentally recalling everything experienced during that time. The previous evening, he decisively left behind the NPCs, who were crowding to be his companions. But he quickly realized the harsh reality. They had traveled here by cart for a whole 8 hours. Come on, it's just a game. A naive thought flashed by. He was walking through the dark thicket, refusing to believe that the developers would make him go on foot. Time passed, dawns were replaced by sunsets, and he kept walking and walking, still hoping it was just a joke. They sure will make me, he mentally exploded at this damned walking simulator. He really trudged on his feet the whole day. He wanted to spend the night on the road, but the forest ecosystem turned out to be so dangerously real that he just collapsed, exhausted, into the grass among the fireflies, cursing this damn high-quality game. A system message about arrival at the Tatar trading post appeared before his eyes. He almost shed a tear of happiness, but quickly composed himself. It was time to turn in the quest with the slain forest jellyfish. The girl clerk looked at him seriously, tightly clutching a pouch with the brought evidence in her hand. She assured that as soon as dawn broke, the guild would check the trophy and finally pay him the deserved reward. A message about the completed quest flashed before his eyes, but the bloodied Khan barely stood on his feet, ironically thinking that he was aging from such gaming overloads. The girl shouted his name in shock, Meanwhile, Khan mentally admitted to himself, if it weren't for the full immersion capsule, he would have long ago deleted this crazy game out of rage. She could not believe that he had returned so quickly, and entrusted the boy with the bag of coins to escort the hero to the hotel. The little one happily scampered forward, and Khan caught himself thinking that the stranger's carefree mood somewhat dispelled his own fatigue. As soon as they stepped into the night, the guide eagerly asked about the slain demon. Khan sharply cut him off. Such things are no joke. The boy instantly became embarrassed and muttered an apologetic excuse for not knowing how to behave like a normal adult, even in a game. They walked leisurely along the festive streets, and Khan had already decided to definitely give this odd fellow generous tips from his solid earnings. As soon as he reached the room, Khan, still in armor and exhausted, collapsed face down on the bed. The fatigue indicator brightly glowed at a critical 100%. He heavily rolled onto his back, angrily cursing the game, which increasingly resembled a real survival test. A window popped up before his eyes, offering 6 hours of sleep. The young man sighed heavily, deciding to postpone all thoughts about exiting the game until a fresh head. His finger weakly pressed the confirmation button. High in the night sky, the stars shone carefreely. 2 of them burned especially brightly, piercing the darkness. Their cold light penetrated through the window into the semi-darkness. A deaf stone room with massive doors seemed absolutely empty. Heavy boots silently stepped onto the stone floor. The door creaked loudly. On the bed lay motionless a gray-haired young man. Someone's hand clenched the spiked mace handle until the knuckles turned white. The dark-haired attacker snarled fiercely and raised the weapon with both hands high above the sleeping man's head. A dull crunch, and blood splattered in all directions. Suddenly a red system warning flashed before the eyes. Enemy within a 10-meter radius. He glared gloomily from under his brow. He had to get up urgently. A lightning-fast block. His black sword stopped the heavy spiked club strike with a clang. The attacker cursed fiercely, although the hero barely restrained himself from shouting that he was the one who should be outraged by this sudden attack of a psycho. Cursing his faulty detection skill that only triggered right under his nose, he forcefully threw the enemy away. The attacker flew off with a muffled groan. The hero slowly straightened up, looming over the opponent who realized with horror what terrible power he had encountered. Fingers sharply grasped the sword hilt. One wide, bloody swing, and the attacker fell on his back, hysterically begging for mercy for the failed attempt to steal a wallet. The tip of the black blade froze near the bloodied chest. A cold order sounded to drop weapons and put hands behind the head. However, the hero immediately rolled his eyes mentally at his own remark, which sounded not like the words of a tough warrior, but like a banal phrase of a cheap cop. The spiked club fell to the floor with a crash, and the frightened thief whimpered, begging to spare his life. The young man with an eye patch calmly stopped the hostile blade with his bare hand, mockingly saying that nowadays, wallets are won by cracking skulls. The attacker broke out in a cold sweat, but barked hysterically in response, ready to fight to the end. A lightning-fast move, and the one-eyed man easily twisted the enemy, swinging his own black sword. The attacker received a hard blow with the hilt, right in the forehead. The victor looked contemptuously at the fallen man, mocking his pathetic attempt to attack with such a toy iron. The robber instantly lost consciousness, and a comically huge bump swelled on the top of his head. The tired swordsman mercilessly grabbed the loser right by her, complaining that such minor scuffles only irritate after a hard day. He kicked the door open with his foot, muttering in disappointment that he expected a whole gang of bandits, but got some ridiculous joke instead. The young man dragged the unconscious body straight to the registration desk, where the establishment's employee was peacefully dozing. The thud of the body thrown on the floor made the girl jump in horror. The hero, with a terrifying aura and the beaten robber in his hand, gloomily asked to finally let him sleep. In response, a piercing, frantic scream sounded. The girl froze in panic, which completely confused the hero. He sighed heavily and asked her to open her eyes, since no one was being killed here. A system warning flashed before his eyes. Enemy within a 10-meter radius. With a crash, a red-haired priestess burst in, shouting about a fresh murder on the spot. She screamed fiercely that he had completely ceased to be human. Her heavy mace flew with a whistle to his head. A lightning-fast block with a black sword, and sparks flew in all directions. Metal struck metal. Holding the blow, the boy mentally got annoyed. This problematic NPC always appeared at the worst moment and dragged the plot by the ears. The girl squinted fiercely, not intending to retreat. They bounced off each other, preparing to continue the fight. But instead of fear, the boy grinned smugly, clashes with this fanatic always activated full immersion mode in him. He threatened her with death, while recalling the rage button he himself had created in the game. This priestess regularly reacted to triggers about God and the devil at every meeting, and right now she was furiously pounding on this imaginary panel with both hands, breaking into a fanatical scream. The red-haired girl snarled fiercely, ordering the dirty demon in human form to shut up. The boy with the eye patch cheerfully agreed, intercepting the weapon. He easily swung the blade, leaving a shining arc trail in the air. The girl's eyes flashed dangerously. The young man confidently advised her to retreat, so as not to hasten his own death. His pupil sharply contracted. The next moment he struck her with a heavy blow. The girl barely managed to block the attack with the black sword, sparking showers of sparks. Their confrontation suddenly broke off. A loud crackle of energy pierced the space around. The boy's body was instantly bound by massive magical chains. He immediately recognized the technique. It was binding, a magical skill of the highest SS rank. It completely paralyzed any movements and abilities of the victim. From the shadow finally emerged the Archmage Lady, a white lioness with a staff, whose appearance the prisoner had been waiting for. Knowing that the magic would soon dissipate on its own, the boy decided to play along and dramatically feigned suffering, ignoring the furious threats of the red-haired woman to tear out his tongue. The red-haired priestess confusedly gripped the shining staff, not understanding why she was ordered to stop. At that very moment, the magical chains on the dark blade snapped with a crack. Purple energy burst free. The beastman lion paled. Cold sweat rolled down his face. The sword, engulfed in thick dark flames, was completely unsheathed. A heavy, oppressive aura instantly filled the entire hall. The attendees froze. The girl could not believe her eyes. This boy had just playfully broken the binding spell, and the young man with the eye patch stood completely unshaken. In his thoughts, he himself sincerely wondered how he managed it. After all, in the original game, this control was so broken that the forum was constantly flooded with complaints about cheaters. The beastman nervously coughed, begging everyone to calm down and write it off as another misunderstanding. But the priestess flared up with anger and categorically demanded explanations, for she had seen the murder with her own eyes. The white-maned beastman snarled indignantly, reproaching the Inquisitor that anger had completely blinded her. He ordered her to look around and check for herself whether the young man had actually killed anyone. On the floor, trembling with horror before the blonde swordsman, a beaten man whimpered and babbled something about a monster. The red-haired woman froze, not believing her own eyes. The probable victim turned out to be alive. Stunned, she sharply turned to the young man. He just laughed carelessly and waved off, saying he really wanted to finish off this thief, but in the end, restrained himself. The beastman cautiously asked him to explain what had happened here. He admitted that demanding answers after a sudden attack was shameless, but asked to calm the other guests and dispel their anxiety. The swordsman looked around in surprise. A whole crowd of frightened witnesses had already gathered in the corridor. The boy turned and thundered at the thief, ordering him to speak for himself and stop showing his back. A heavy boot stepped forward, forcing the thief to plead pitifully for mercy. The youth's eye flashed with a bloody light, and a heavy dark aura covered the space as he quietly asked if the order needed to be repeated. The thief instantly broke down and hysterically shouted that it was only his fault because he just wanted to steal money. Sobbing, the thief confessed that he was tempted by the generous tips given by the youth, leaving the Inquisitor silently blinking in realization of her own mistake. While the boy rejoiced at the resolution of all misunderstandings, the exhausted swordsman dryly advised him to take care of his safety, and cut off by saying that their paths diverge here. He immediately headed for the exit, ignoring the confused youth's pleas to wait. There was no need to pack things because everything was already in the inventory, so the hero only dreamed of a quick rest. Suddenly, quick footsteps sounded behind him. The swordsman caught himself thinking, why do the faces of these priestess and mage seem painfully familiar to him? In the previous commotion and darkness, he simply did not see them, but now, his memory stubbornly pieced together the puzzle. He suddenly stopped and turned to the red-haired girl. His gaze became sharp and scrutinizing. The girl shuddered, staring at him with frightened eyes. Her confused face was clearly reflected in his pupil. He was stunned by the sudden guess. The red-haired priestess with a heavy mace froze stunned on the threshold. She could not take a single step. The young man with an eye patch squinted, looking closely at her face. The blazing braid is a classic hairstyle of the doomed. Shining green eyes. The puzzle came together. Before him stood an official character of the priest class from the game Legend of Heroes. A brief pause. A tall lioness woman with a staff pushed rudely through the door and began to lecture the priestess not to poke the bear. The young man shifted his gaze to the archmage. The proud stance of a white lion and tall stature sharply distinguished her among ordinary beast folk. Exact copy of the official game mage. This broke the canon. In the original, such heroes never appeared outside the player's storyline, as they had their own unique stories. Assessing the unexpected company, he realized that the system deliberately brought them together, imposing group play with NPCs. Only one step remained to be taken forward. The boy with the eye patch crossed his arms irritably. Teamwork was not part of his plans at all. He decided to just observe the situation, but suddenly lost patience and harshly ordered the interlocutor to be silent. The young man sneered. Could it be that the noble priestess considers the words of demonic kin empty sound? The red-haired girl screamed in fear, apologizing that she only wanted to say sorry. She squinted sharply, gathering her courage. With a dull thud, the priestess fell heavily to her knees. Bowing before him, she firmly stated that her guilt could not be atoned for by words alone. The tension instantly soared to the limit. Looking at him with eyes burning with despair, she exclaimed, "If apologies are not enough, he can cut off her head." The swordsman froze in shock, staring at the girl's red hair. An awkward silence prevailed. The priestess froze in a deep bow, pressing her forehead to the cold floor near his boots. "Are you out of your mind?" the shocked boy could only manage to squeeze out. The boy with the eye patch shuddered, dripping with cold sweat. Looking at the figure bowed before him, he mentally screamed that he had not signed up to be a soulless killing machine at all. Someone's hands tightly gripped the silver mace, and he was horrified. Where did she get such extreme thinking from? His gaze darted aside. Who had even raised such fanaticism in the girl? The white lioness werewolf nearby trembled just as strongly, openly not understanding how to get out of the situation. He mentally begged her to intervene, because if he backed down now, he would instantly ruin his image. The boy burned her with a heavy, expectant look. The werewolf gasped convulsively. Her lips trembled. Suddenly, the space was cut by an inscription, the point of view of the archmage. From the side, her face looked icy and absolutely impenetrable, perfectly hiding the inner hysteria. The red-haired girl desperately begged to spare the young inquisitor, demanding to punish herself. The white lioness gaped in shock at such a turn of events. The red-haired girl screamed desperately for the archmage not to do this, because only she was to blame. The horned girl hesitantly addressed the swordsman with the eye patch, begging for mercy. The red-haired girl sharply interrupted. It was her mistake, so she should pay the price as well. The boy sighed mentally. He would have to finish everything himself. He found it a bit strange to punish ordinary NPCs, but aloud he coldly cut off that they had wasted their chance. With sparks of energy, he drew a massive blue sword. The vaginas fell dully onto the cobblestones. The verdict sounded briefly. They chose their own punishment. The redhead stared in horror at the blade hanging right above her face. She tightly squeezed her eyes shut, hiding from the inevitable. The strike cut through the air with a whistle. The blonde companion flinched at the sound. The redhead trembled, convulsively gripping the weapon until she dared to open one eye. Alive? The boy stood indifferently under the moonlight, throwing the sword over his shoulder. The tension subsided, and the girl collapsed helplessly, face down. The girl with red hair clenched the metal rod until her knuckles turned white. She recoiled, spreading her arms in silent confusion. Cold sweat rolled down her cheek, and her jaws clenched tightly from tension. Looking at the swordsman's back as he calmly walked away, she desperately asked why he did it. The young man only smiled smugly. He brilliantly saved her life without even breaking character. Suddenly, an episode surfaced in his memory where a white-haired girl was furiously swinging a mace. The facts matched. That stranger from the prologue was the same age and fought with the exact same weapon. "Are you just going to leave like that?" the redhead shouted, while behind her the lioness beastfolk froze in confusion. He only coldly threw over his shoulder a warning to watch her tongue. In his thoughts, he was pleased that he saved her from the death row hairstyle, so now she should take care of herself. And aloud he mercilessly warned that next time he would knock her head off, and continued on his way. His hand confidently rested on his weapon as he mockingly addressed her one last time as an inquisitor. The girl jerked forward sharply, but the lioness firmly held her by the shoulders, ordering her to stand still. The boy with the bandage smiled slyly. He was sure these NPCs would follow him anyway. He laughed silently, waiting for a new fun event from this company. Throwing his hands behind his head, the young man leisurely trotted away down the night street. The red-haired inquisitor froze in shock. The words of the archmage surfaced in memory, that the body of this madman was supposedly possessed by a demon. The white lioness nearby thoughtfully closed her eyes. The puzzle slowly came together. The Inquisitor knelt down, lowering his heavy weapon. He perfectly understood what inhuman torments the boy had to endure because of that monster. His fist clenched to trembling. How could a person with such devastating strength and hatred simply turn around and leave without anger? The lioness looked at the oppressed warrior with calm compassion and called this act true mercy. Her quiet words hung in the night's silence. From the darkness emerged dozens of crimson eyes. With such will, he really managed to tame the demon within his own body. The knight, with a massive sword on his back, stood motionless before the gigantic, shadowy maw. The ore froze. It still had a long way to go to reach such resilience. The priestess fell to her knees before the cut strand on the floor, heavily leaning on the mace. The lioness nearby only humbly closed her eyes. The girl burst out in a scream, having understood everything, interrupting the guidance of her companion. She was trembling with emotion. This warrior was vitally necessary for their journey. A lunge forward, absolute determination burned in her green eyes. Fingers clenched the hair lifted from the floor until white. The lioness continued to smile gently. She silently approved this fervor. In the night silence under the bright glow of the full moon, only an amazed sigh flashed. Gray-eyed in a starry mantle and red-haired youth froze, staring into the night darkness. Above them shone a bright, huge full moon. The system was counting down time. About 2 days remained until full immersion. Above the town stretched a peaceful morning sky. The next day, the local tavern had already opened its doors. The hall buzzed. Visitors were lively, having breakfast and exchanging gossip. The clatter of metal. A hand in a black glove forcefully stabbed a fork into a piece of meat. A gloomy swordsman with 2-colored hair and an eye patch looked heavily ahead. His interlocutor, a white lioness priestess, only wearily squinted her eyes. A red-haired girl nearby tensely stared at the strange youth. Suddenly, the swordsman broke into a joyful smile and showed a thumbs up, joking that he was deliberately given a day off. However, he immediately became serious, promised not to break the furniture, and swore that his proposal would cause no damage. Levitia raised her palms, flatly refusing even to listen. Then the swordsman with a clatter threw a heavy boot right onto their table. A predatory and cheeky smile played on his lips. He coldly cut off, saying that their sudden appearance itself was already pure losses and a big problem. At such blatant audacity, the red-haired priestess even opened her mouth in shock. The red-haired girl slammed her hand on the table with a bang, frightening the entire tavern, and loudly declared that she came to learn his generosity. Her cheeks were burning, and her green eyes revealed wild excitement. The one-eyed swordsman only tilted his head in surprise. He was feverishly pondering whether he had fallen out of character. The boy suspected a systemic error due to frequent deviations from the script, while the girl bitterly admitted that she had spent her whole life vainly learning mercy. She bowed her head, admitting that he calmly forgave her insults time after time. The girl clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white, realizing how hard it was for him. Behind her back, ghostly angel wings suddenly flared up. She exclaimed passionately that she had finally seen her true path in him, and although she had behaved incredibly rudely before, now she was not going to retreat. The swordsman sighed heavily in his mind. She charged at him with her repentance, like a blazing locomotive without brakes. He froze resignedly. A filled checklist of his favorite character popped up before his eyes. He finally gave up, because as a true otaku, he could never resist such sincere clumsiness. Sitting in front of the screen, he remembered that even in the old game, he always preferred the priest class. So now he conciliatorily patted the confused red-haired priestess on the head, assuring her that everything was fine. He mentally praised the girl for her quick wit. Outwardly, the young man maintained an icy calm, ordering himself to keep the image, while the priestess panicked, wondering if she had said too much. She squeezed her hands guiltily. Suddenly, a magical flash struck her back. He looked around irritably and dryly noted this attempt to spoil his mood. Drawing his sword, the young man loomed over the frightened blonde and called her attack an original suicide, completely ignoring the pleas to listen. He coldly cut off, saying they had nothing to share except the blade, when suddenly a desperate shout rang out. "Satan!" The giant white lion let out a roar. Could it be that he would draw his sword anyway, even if he was capable of killing the Demon King? The boy's pupil widened in surprise. His fingers gripped the weapon tighter. He intercepted the dark staff. "What does this conversation even mean?" he asked sharply. The red-haired girl and the tall lioness beastfolk nervously swallowed saliva. They exchanged glances. The man's single eye opposite suddenly radiated icy cold. He hated demons more than anyone they knew. The girl understood, After mentioning Satan, any lie would end with his blind blade tearing them to pieces. The Inquisitor's hand clenched into a fist without hesitation, but the girl's green eyes looked resolute. Her life existed for a great purpose. She mentally acknowledged that death for deceit at such a moment would be well-deserved. Together with the lioness, they obediently froze before the table. Meanwhile, the one-eyed man mentally screamed with delight. The plot twist with Satan revealed so early. The whole development of events seemed to him a brilliant divine game, a true gift for a fan. After all, in this world, the title of Inquisitor meant a ruthless religious judge. And in his favorite game, it was also an elite class, to which the best priests advanced. The blonde warrior in heavy temple armor tightly gripped the shining mace. In this world, they were called executors, those who carry the will of the temple outward. And the young Inquisitoress had a significant reason to leave the sanctuary. The white-haired lioness calmly continued the story. It all boiled down to a single word: revelation. In the memories, the red-haired priestess humbly knelt before the divine light that reached out its hand to her. The voice from above proclaimed her true destiny: to banish Satan himself. Her green eyes flared with determination, but handling it alone was impossible. So first, she enlisted the support of the Archmage. The priestess told the one-eyed youth directly. She knew he wouldn't like it, but it was precisely for his help that they had come again. The lioness opened her mouth, about to add something, but the boy fiercely snarled at her. Didn't the Archmage promise that everything would pass without problems? The werebeast only coughed awkwardly, his face twisted. This naive girl seemed so amusing to him in her delusion that he barely restrained a nervous smile. He stepped forward heavily, desperately trying to understand. Wasn't the revelation supposed to be received by the player? Grabbing his head, the youth mentally howled. In this cursed remake, the plot had completely broken down, and now revolved entirely around the priestess. The white-maned lioness fearfully stretched her paws forward, begging to be given the floor. The mercenary sharply turned around, hearing her crazy proposal, to wage war on Satan himself. A system message about the first step to victory over the Demon King flashed before his eyes. The main quest opened, and meanwhile the girl reminded him of his fame as a hunter who never backs down from evil. She opened her bright blue eye, sincerely believing that Satan's death would forever cleanse their world of monsters. He openly doubted her powers, so the lioness indignantly suggested going to the temple for proof of her heroism. Suddenly, a red-haired priestess appeared nearby, calmly confirming. The church indeed recognizes this beast woman as a heroine. Two wooden swords thudded heavily onto the floor. The mercenary thoughtfully looked over his new companions. It seemed he could no longer escape from this company. One question spun in his mind: what to do now? He bowed his head heavily, pondering what he had heard. A crooked smile appeared on his face. These words simply had to be true. System windows popped up before his eyes. Accompanied by him were a hyperactive Red Inquisitor and a calm lioness Archmage. The quest updated the objective on the way to the Demon King. Join the punitive squad and talk to the mage. The young man in a heavy cloak towered over the table with leftovers, tightly gripping his massive sword. There was no long conversation. The new companions silently stood up and headed for the exit. Above the peaceful tiled roofs of the trading city, the wind was raging. A carriage was already rattling swiftly down the narrow cobblestone street. Having joined the squad, he immediately left the settlement, ignoring the reward offers and the tavern owner's tearful pleas to give him another chance. The locals watched the crew with confused looks, but the hero firmly maintained the role of his cold character and simply ignored everyone for the sake of the main quest. He sat inside, arms crossed on his chest, detachedly, listening to the monotonous clatter of hooves. But suddenly his gaze sharply slid to the side. She was shining, and he could not understand why this girl had been looking at him with such incredible admiration from the very beginning. Her huge green eyes simply glowed with adoration, and it was quite tense. He, on the other hand, constantly threw insults and offenses. By any logic, her sympathy should have long since hit rock bottom. A quiet, systemic tinkling interrupted the reflections. A window with rules unfolded before his eyes. Orders can be given to NPC companions, but everything depends on the level of their trust. Only the game completely concealed this indicator, and for him, spoiling relationships with characters was always a usual matter. He clearly remembered how he used to cold-bloodedly cut off any hopes she had for companionship. Now, silently examining the companion, the boy assumed that the starting NPCs were simply programmed from the beginning for blind loyalty. The girl continued to happily stare at him. He sat calmly, swinging his legs in time with the movement of the carriage. In his imagination, she finally turned into a cute, plump bun with kimchi. Turning to the window, he smiled and admitted, with this short haircut, her endless, naive enthusiasm looked funny and very cute, despite the hidden strength. Watching her and the silent lion companion, he was moved as if looking at his own long-suffering child. The idol was sharply cut by the voice of the lioness. She tensed and asked why their leader had still not inquired about either the purpose of the trip or the authenticity of the revelation. The young man with the eye patch listened gloomily to the interlocutor. When he carelessly stated that he would learn about the new quest zone only on the spot, the warrior warned directly he would tear him to pieces for lying, and he didn't care about the rest. He clanged heavily with armored gauntlets, firmly crossing his arms on his chest. Ignoring jokes about sudden trust, the young man ordered to be warned about all important details in advance. The unknown man in the cloak only laughed quietly. He perfectly understood that the warrior actually didn't care. The gaze of the single eye remained icy. Their new task was to exorcise demons at the request of the temple. The carriage was already quickly rolling along the sunlit forest road. On the way, an explanation was given that their group always responds to priests' requests for support. The red-haired priestess looked seriously at the warrior. She began to preach about the holy duty to the needy, but the young man sharply interrupted her. He was interested exclusively in facts about the type and number of the unclean. The girl had to admit that the message contained only the fact of the demon's appearance, and all details would have to be clarified at the temple. The priestess sharply turned away, and the warrior, irritably, threw at her back that such creatures were of no use at all. A system window popped up before the young man with a new quest: to find the hidden evil in the village and talk to the bishop. He was surprised that this was not the main task, but decided that any progress would do. His face remained indifferent. About 1.5 days remained until the end of the full immersion session in virtual reality. The carriage barely trudged along the forest road, stealing his precious time. He wearily closed his eyes. The young man ordered his companions to wake him upon arrival and leaned back in his seat. The red-haired girl opposite barely blushed, her thoughts returning to the events of the previous night. Then she was standing alone on her knees, in a room flooded with bright light. The lace of the dark dress lay motionless on the floor. The silence was broken by a knock. A guest addressed her as an inquisitor through the door, and the girl allowed the archmage to enter. The door creaked loudly. A lion-like mage entered the room and grimly stated that they needed to have a serious talk. He looked at her sternly and reminded her she must clearly understand what it means to allow someone to take her life. A voice from the darkness coldly asked if she was aware of the burden of the mission placed upon her. The white-haired archmage grimly recalled the mercy of others that saved them from the irreparable. The red-haired girl stood with her back turned and quietly admitted her guilt for impulsive, irresponsible words. She exhaled uncertainly, addressing the archmage. She sharply turned around with horror in her eyes, realizing that she had almost taken the life of an innocent person. The girl humbly froze on the floor in a single beam of light, listening to the harsh truth. Justice is justified violence that must be handled with extreme care. The 9th commandment was pronounced: never be certain of your own justice. The archmage closed her eyes heavily. She clenched her trembling hands until the bones whitened. She was tormented by the thought of how many more people she could have lost due to her blind ignorance. The girl admitted to herself that she had lost the right to be called a hero, but the mercy shown to her suddenly gave a chance for atonement. She understood. For those past words, she deserved only death. Bright light flooded the room through the window. Thanks to someone else's forgiveness, she took a step towards her true goal. The girl raised her gaze, and in her green eyes, instead of despair, a quiet determination flared. The man with the eye patch stood majestically in the dazzling light. He is the one who carries the teaching in the name of God. Everyone around whispered that he resembled a true apostle. He confidently crossed his arms, clad in white armor. The red-haired girl bowed her head and quietly wished a peaceful sleep under the eye of God. She smiled warmly, folding her palms in a sincere prayer. The silence was broken by the loud clatter of hooves. The carriage quickly rushed along the green forest road. The journey ended only at night, when the coach entered a quiet settlement. The hero's face sank into a thick shadow, and his gaze became extremely gloomy. Under the bright moon, the bitter truth reached him. The road took a whole 3 days of in-game time. Damn game, he sighed irritably. Inside, everything boiled with rage. If a normal trip takes this long, the developers should ban full immersion altogether. He almost cried from frustration, as the full immersion solution had just devoured hundreds of thousands of won of his real money. Clenching his teeth, he He decided to squeeze the absolute maximum out of the remaining time. The system updated the quest, indicating the path to the temple, and the red-haired priestess immediately commanded to set off. She cheerfully clenched her fist, ready to lead them forward. But the boy had already jumped up and rushed into the darkness, leaving the girl confusedly shouting after him. She had to run after him at full speed, gasping from such a frantic pace. The white lioness behind them only sighed resignedly, grumbling that she could no longer keep up with the youth. She slightly bowed her head. The werewolf suddenly froze in the middle of the cobblestone street. Her soul was unexpectedly gripped by an incomprehensible, sticky anxiety. Against the backdrop of the endless sky, a lonely black feather slowly drifted by, and in a moment, the night silence was shattered by the sharp noise of the wings of a whole flock of ravens. The blackbirds ominously circled above the spires of the majestic castle temple to which they were heading. Heavy black boots echoed as they stepped onto the patterned floor. A man with black and white hair and an eye patch stood motionless, and the crystal on his armor flared with a dazzling glow. The gloomy premonition of the sage finally became reality. The red-haired warrior grabbed the sword and shield and screamed wildly, preparing his squad for the clash. "Demon!" they shouted desperately behind him. Everything instantly drowned in a swift white flash. A sharp step forward loudly broke the tension in the hall. "He is not an enemy!" A desperate cry cut through the silence. The red-haired priestess extended her hand forward with a shining seal, causing those present to freeze in realization. Could this really be the true sign of the hero before them? The young man with the shield blinked in confusion, while the girl fervently swore that their target was an ordinary demon victim, not its accomplice. Her green eye flashed fiercely with unwavering faith. The other priests immediately murmured discontentedly. They whispered about the obvious demonic aura and the young age of the girl who had just received her revelation. Someone cautiously suggested first reporting the incident to the higher clergy. At that very moment, someone's hand firmly gripped the massive magical staff. A dull thud sounded. The staff struck the floor with force, raising a blue wave of energy, and a brief, quiet, instantly ended all disputes. The young man with the shield flinched and turned in shock toward the tall, white-haired beastfolk. She did not even open her eyes, calmly reminding those present that the hero had already ordered to lower their weapons. The priests exchanged puzzled glances, instantly losing all their zeal. They meekly lowered their shoulders, accepting the order. The guards obediently lowered their weapons. The governor's order of the god was not to be questioned. The red-haired priestess nervously clenched her fists, while he calmed her by saying the guards had no ill intentions. Otherwise, he would have cut them down long ago. In fact, the guy openly enjoyed how easily the local NPCs resolved all conflicts themselves. A short command sounded, and the group moved inside. He confidently walked through the palace, mentally laughing at how amusingly both girls tried to adapt to the situation. But fun is fun, and the condition was taking its toll. The guy stopped in front of the massive doors, feeling how fatigue gradually overwhelmed him due to the game's excessive realism. His plan was clear: extract information and leave immediately. The shadows of the companions silently slid across the smooth floor. They entered a magnificent corridor flooded with bright light. Sun rays pierced through the windows, drawing a clear pattern on the marble around the lonely candelabrum. The gray-haired servant at the table with candelabra concluded that there were already enough inquiries in the case. The priest calmly suggested to the guest to end the evening and go to his room. He kindly added that dinner would be brought directly to the room. The hero instantly deciphered this politeness. Don't get underfoot, lock yourself in the room, and sleep. Enduring this hypocritical staring game had already become a habit. Playing the fool was fun, but any performance is exhausting, so he sharply got up from the table. He was not going to stay in the nest of hypocrites. It was much more honest to sleep on the bare ground. At such words, the priest shuddered and fearfully covered his mouth with his hand. Suddenly a system flashed before his eyes. The quest updated, requiring to track down a hidden demon in the village. The hero only snorted, because he already perfectly understood whom exactly to look for, and confidently set off on reconnaissance. Behind him, a red-haired girl gasped, fearfully calling him a devilish knight. She rushed after him, begging him to wait. The girl desperately shouted at his back, and with a run-up, she grabbed his armored arm. In vain. At that very moment, red energy flared up, and the hero jerked her away harshly. A crimson trail flashed with a whistle in the darkness. The young man with an eye patch glared fiercely over his shoulder, and ordered in an icy tone not to touch him. The frightened red-haired priestess broke out in a cold sweat, mumbled apologies, and timidly asked where he was going. Instead of the boy, another voice responded. From behind the priestess emerged a tall lioness, who calmly stated that the question was unnecessary. The boy grinned confidently. He was going to kill the demon. The tension burst instantly. The young man comically waved his hands and began to justify that completing the quest with them was unbearably long. The hero turned around and walked down the corridor, throwing out at the last moment that he would quickly finish the task himself. The girls froze, watching his figure with surprise. The corners of the lioness's lips slowly crept upward. She smiled slyly, purring that the boy made her embarrassed. The priestess continued to blink nervously, completely confused. But the lioness did not let her come to her senses. She joyfully picked up her partner and declared that they were following. The figure in black clothing briefly confirmed the archmage's order. The blonde bishop swallowed nervously, watching the company that had already headed for the exit. At the last moment, the white-haired beastman coldly threw over his shoulder. Their friend was not the kind to sleep peacefully when a demon was lurking nearby. These words made the priest break out in a cold sweat. He froze in confusion, not knowing what to answer. Suddenly, a desperate cry echoed, asking to wait. A silhouette in a black cloak tore after them, demanding to take them with him. Behind the stained glass, all this was silently listened to by a black raven, while in the hall they recalled the name of the infamous Devil Knight. The bird flashed its eye bead predatorily. With a loud fluttering of wings, the flock startled and took off from the tower of the majestic castle. Night fell, and the dense crowns of the forest plunged into complete darkness. A dreadful bird caw cut through the silence. A lonely winged silhouette swiftly flashed against the backdrop of a bright full moon. Eventually, the motley trio, the one-eyed swordsman, the beastman, and the girl, set off as a single team to find the witness and extract the truth from him. The lion-like woman gently smiled from behind his back and asked if he had already figured out the type of demon. She jokingly added that the sage was simply testing everyone, which greatly puzzled the red-haired inquisitor. The girl abruptly turned around and blurted out a request to share the guess. She tensed in anticipation. One-Eyed calmly said that he still does not believe in her heroism, making the girl demand respect. The inquisitress indignantly raised her voice. The swordsman interrupted her and directly asked which species the hidden demon belongs to. He quietly exhaled, mentally noting her stubborn devotion to faith even after insults. The girl was instantly struck. If it is a draugr, then the creature should be sought near the source of a strong stench. The trio moved on, deciding to check the local cemetery, where this evil usually originates. One-Eyed averted his gaze, listening to her modest excuses. He tried hard to suppress a satisfied smile, recalling that in the original plot, this incident exposed temple corruption. His eye gleamed predatory. It remained only to see how everything would turn out in the remake. Heavy footsteps echoed on the cobblestones. The red-haired girl suddenly froze. She sharply turned to her companions and warned about a strange smell. The magical trail led them to a narrow passage between the houses. The source was right there. The trio cautiously moved into the darkness, following the glowing dust. Small sparks swirled in the darkness. The white-haired warrior took a lantern from his belt. His single eye carefully peered into the darkness. A quiet click, and the space was flooded with bright light. The beam snatched from the darkness an exhausted man who was weakly leaning against a stone wall. A terrible suspicion instantly pierced the mind. The red-haired woman froze in unbelieving shock. From the darkness, a terribly mutilated, emaciated face looked at them. The situation suddenly began to take extremely strange turns. A hand in a leather glove raised a lantern, tearing through the thick darkness. The light snatched from the gloom an exhausted blond man with an empty, glassy gaze. Two approached him closely. Seeing the terrible scene, the red-haired priestess exclaimed in shock and rushed to call the guard. She begged the tall beast man for help in panic. The one-eyed swordsman nearby only frowned. Earlier, he thought the local stench was just a sign of the era. Only now did he realize that the unbearable smell came from a dead draugr, whom he would still have to hunt. The warrior silently knelt before the victim. The lantern clattered onto the cold floor. Peering into the extinguished eyes, the swordsman firmly promised to take revenge upon himself. His palm gently covered the face of the slain, closing his eyes forever. The priestess nearby folded her hands and began sincerely reciting a requiem prayer. The darkness was dispelled by soft, warm light. The red-haired priestess quietly whispered, "Amen," folding her hands in prayer. The young man nearby did not believe in gods, but mentally appreciated this performance, dryly reminding himself that the executioner would soon take the body. A sorceress shapeshifter descended the stairs. The fresh scent of blood told her that the draugr killer was still very close. She sharply raised her palms. A complex blue magical circle flared up beneath her feet. A powerful energy wave whistled through the dark corridor. The search magic activated. The sorceress's eyes glowed in the darkness, The trail would not last long, but it was enough for a quick pursuit. The young man instantly sprang from his place and rushed forward, while the shapeshifter only sighed at his impatience and called the Inquisitor after him. The red-haired woman nodded while running, promising to perform the cleansing on the go. Her eyes flared, and a dazzling stream of holy light burst from her outstretched hand. The young man glanced back at the bright glow and smiled with satisfaction. Now they definitely would not get lost on the way back. Although he was a convinced solo player, he could not deny the obvious advantages of the group. Wasting not a second more, he dashed forward at a crazy speed, leaving only sparks behind him. He sharply squinted his eye. The boot forcefully slammed into the cobblestone. The red-haired companion rushed after him. The path ended in a dead end. The blue magical trail led straight into the stone. The Draugr simply passed through the solid wall. The lioness froze in confusion. She suggested climbing higher and looking for a detour, but he squinted fiercely. If this is a game, why not test its limits? Wait, you again? The partner only managed to scream. Instead of a long detour, he rushed forward and kicked the wall with his boot. The world around blurred from the wild upward jerk. Breaking all laws of gravity, he pushed off and soared high into the sky, the body perfectly grouped in the jump. The armored hand firmly grabbed the edge of the roof, against the backdrop of the dazzling full moon. The heavy boot forcefully pushed off the surface. The arm clad in armor sharply grabbed the edge. The young man in a long cloak fell like a stone against the backdrop of the night city. The whistle of the wind, a rapid fall, a clear landing on one knee. Under the light of the full moon, a worried address to the devilish night was heard. Two women hurried after him, outraged by his reckless act. The beast woman and the red-haired priest stopped, heavily catching their breath from running. They froze on the bridge, stunned, looking at the unharmed swordsman. The pompous aura instantly disappeared. The warrior's face stretched into a wide, childish smile, and he sincerely shouted, "Cool!" He clenched his fists with delight, amazed that he could jump so easily, even without skills, and the resistance of the wind and the impacts on the ground felt incredibly realistic. He smugly adjusted his collar and mentally praised his sudden talent for parkour, but quickly came back down to earth. There was not enough time. He had to find the demon before the tracking magic faded. From the roof, he surveyed the night city, through which bright magical threads of the trail wove. The boot heavily stepped on the edge of the cornice. The wind fluttered the cloak, while the warrior stood tall with the sword against the full moon backdrop. The enemy turned out to be pathetic and resorted to cheap tricks. He squinted predatory, realizing that the hide-and-seek games were over. A sharp jolt cracked the tile. He dashed across the rooftops like lightning, leaving behind only the crack of broken cornices. A quick bounce off the chimney, and he fell down like a stone. A maniacal smile spread across his face. The night silence was shattered by a mad laugh. He landed spectacularly in the middle of the street, and triumphantly spread his arms like a star after the final performance. The night sky over the sleeping city announced the beginning of a new divine game. Suddenly, a dazzling pillar of pink light struck from above. The boy with two colored hair landed on one knee, forcefully driving a massive sword into the cracked earth. A hand in a black glove clenched tightly, and in the darkness, a promise of revenge for the dead sounded. A system window appeared before his eyes, with a description of the Draugr, a man-eating ghost capable of swimming through stone. From the thick darkness emerged burning red eyes, but he only calmly raised a blood-red blade to meet them. He sharply ordered the monster to stop the pathetic hiding, and suddenly he froze in confusion. Lowering his weapon, the boy looked around the empty alley in confusion. The NPCs promised by the system did not appear. Wrinkling from the terrible stench, he only hoped that their small companion had already managed to perform the cleansing. The dark ghost fiercely circled above the rooftops, while the hero grumbled mentally about how hard it is to catch attack timings in reality. Losing interest, he leisurely moved through the dark alley past a bloody puddle. Suddenly, sharp tentacles struck from the shadows, but he did not even flinch. He immediately understood that those who call him Gretchen had come for him. A black boot heavily stepped on the cobblestones. The heavy step broke the silence. The young man was just thinking about how to deter another heretic. He sharply froze. From the darkness under the moonlight emerged a cultist in a hood, pleased with their meeting. The swordsman instantly drew his blood-red blade, but the stranger only grinned eerily and declared that some king was looking for Gretchen. Around the fanatic swirled crimson magic. He turned out to be a contractor who had pledged his own soul to a demon. The young man was genuinely stunned. While the cultist ranted, the swordsman feverishly tried to understand which king and how to even react to this absurd turn. The cultist folded his hands in prayer and joyfully invited him to enjoy the feast of slaughter. The name Gretchen struck his memory. In the original game plot, it had never existed. A sudden realization hit like an electric shock. He quickly looked around into the night. Could it be that the story had broken and taken an unknown path of demon worshippers? The gaze of his single eye became icy and focused. In the darkness under his cloak, a blood-red web spread eerily. A short message before his eyes confirmed. The choice was made. Invisible chains shattered loudly into pieces. His hand broke free in a dazzling flash. A power awakened that no longer belonged to a human, and a crimson aura swiftly enveloped the body. A wild explosion of energy. Knowledge, absolutely inaccessible to ordinary mortals, struck harshly into consciousness. A powerful discharge of bloody lightning pierced him through. He screamed madly, tearing his voice apart, while his eyes were flooded with blinding white light. Casting off human shackles, he froze. Behind his back, enormous demonic wings unfolded. Pale clawed hands reached out from the dense darkness. Massive horns sprouted on his head, and his eye blazed with a predatory bloody gleam. Old clothes tore with a crack. From now on, he stepped onto the path of the true demon knight. Renewed, in an elegant suit, and with a massive flaming sword in hand, he cold-bloodedly took a step forward. The one-eyed man skeptically raised his gaze. Deciding to save experiments with endings for later, he approached the blue-haired man in a cloak. Now it was necessary to strictly adhere to the current plan. He sharply raised the sword, and the blade instantly flared with a violet aura. A devastating strike of dark energy cut through the air. The one-eyed man squinted through the dust, checking if the attack reached. He stood motionless. The blue-haired man shivered miserably with fear, hiding behind another's blade. The swordsman clicked his tongue irritably. The enemy had managed to cover himself with a draugr as a living shield. Drenched in cold sweat, the mage broke down in hysteria and began to plead pitifully for mercy. These words provoked only icy contempt in the one-eyed man. The shadows around him thickened. He realized that even in that hell there was no hiding. A powerful surge of black magic forcefully threw the enemy away. His desperate scream drowned in the whirlpool of destructive energy. The swordsman froze before the giant armored enemy, enveloped in a dark aura. His boot pressed firmly against the stone floor. The young man sharply dropped his blade, barely managing to block the devastating strike from above. With a shout of "Away!" the monster unleashed a storm of black-purple power on him. The boy feverishly defended himself against chaotic shadow attacks. He sharply slid back, increasing the distance. Clenching his teeth, the young man cursed inwardly. He hated shapeless monsters because strikes against them felt like nothing at all. Jumping even further back, he realized that the enemy contractor had greatly strengthened this draugr. It would have been much easier to finish off the puppeteer first. The landing cracked the stone tile right under the blade. The swordsman sharply swung the weapon. The effect of the previously activated destroyer still applied to the next attack. Destructive energy continued to pulse on the blade, even without a direct cutting motion. A wide lunge forward, and the blade unleashed a massive wave of power straight at the target. A deafening explosion tore the enemy's defense to shreds at the epicenter of the fiery burst. Dazzling red beams tore through the darkness. An explosion thundered. Magical energy rained down on the city. Thick smoke slowly dispersed over the square. The swordsman calmly stood among the ruins, as the system credited him with the draugr's kill. The young man with an eye patch smiled fiercely. The annoying obstacle finally disappeared. The frightened, blue-haired sectarian trembled with horror upon hearing the verdict for attacking the guild of Head Mabel. He hysterically shouted that he would never have gone there if he had known about Gretchen. The swordsman lowered his weapon, and his enemy was terrified to death, realizing that before him was a real monster, not an ordinary heretic. The blue-haired man convulsively gulped air. In his memory surfaced the words of a gray-haired aristocrat who dreamed of pleasing the king with the severed head of this young man. Suddenly the silence was broken by a shout about the Devil Knight, and reinforcements ran into the square. A red-haired girl and a white lioness werewolf. While the priest was casting curses, the swordsman mentally exhaled. The appearance of witnesses perfectly solved the problem of interrogation, since by his role he was supposed to kill the sectarian. The young man instantly wiped the fierce expression from his face, unfolded a bright poster, saying, "Welcome, hero," and cheerfully called the arrivals slowpokes with a wide smile. Someone from the crowd hysterically shouted about a sinner who sold his body and soul to the demon. The red-haired girl snarled fiercely and intercepted the heavy cross-shaped mace. A dazzling light struck the eyes. An unknown person declared that he was joining the Devil Knight. The air was cut by a swift jerk. The man in the cloak recoiled and barked in shock. Could it be that he is in league with the enemies? Immediately a desperate scream was heard. Now the cult itself was wailing that Gretchen was betraying them. He clenched the amulet on his chest until the bones turned white and hissed that he himself did not understand anything. The young man with the eye patch reacted indifferently. He didn't care about alliances or who they considered him to be, because the plot would sort everything out itself. He lazily picked at his ear, brazenly ignoring the shocked glances. Suddenly the boy smiled eerily, lowered his thumb down, and threw a short, "Just die." The armored hand sharply swung the sword with a blood-red blade. A cold voice cut in that the miserable worm had no right to ask about the reasons. The youth's face twisted into a maniacal grin, and a blue aura exploded around him. A flock of crows took off into the evening sky. Steps sounded before the luxurious palace. Someone confidently walked down the sunlit corridor. A squad of armed swordsmen in black headed towards the massive doors. A gray-haired warrior with a giant sword on his back silently watched them off. Suddenly, a red-haired girl from the squad sharply looked back. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a scarred, one-eyed warrior coldly stated, the contractor had indeed managed to save his skin. A heavy chain whistled, and the frightened prisoner on the floor let out a pitiful squeak. Heavy boots took a step forward. The one-eyed man tightened the magical shackles and spat through his teeth with hatred, a single address. At that moment, a blonde with animal ears intercepted the shining strike, barely holding back the assault with her crystal. "What the hell are you interfering with me for?" he snarled at the uninvited protector. The lioness beast woman, bound by magical chains, sharply ordered not to finish off the enemy, as he was much more valuable alive. The Draugr turned out to be no ordinary demon. Her cold gaze directly hinted at a powerful patron who had helped with the summoning. She advised to discard instant anger for the sake of a more important goal. The young man with an eye patch sharply turned around on the move. He whistled innocently, justifying himself. To catch the game character, you need to reduce his health, so he planned to deliver the final blow. A system window immediately flashed before him. Capture is possible only after weakening, and the target's death will mean failure. He calmly moved on, realizing that this hint appeared only thanks to the correct plot dialogue. The game remake was truly surprising. The familiar world now worked under new rules and felt completely different. But recently, something else was added. The space ahead was suddenly flooded with the bloody red light of a hologram. The air was torn by a sharp alarm beep. The young man froze, confused in the middle of the corridor, surrounded by a whole wall of flickering messages. He tensed mentally, not understanding what this was at all. Dozens of screens screamed only one thing. His health was continuously falling. A disturbing system window suddenly popped up before his eyes. Health began to gradually drop. He planned to follow behind to see the interrogation with his own eyes. But the deeper he went into the temple, the more frequently red system warning windows popped up before his eyes. He had to turn around and leave. He looked at his armor-clad arm. Could it be that he was being blocked because of the demon sitting inside? Probably it was just another plot hook for the future. The developers made the path of the priest the main storyline, and then slapped a ban on the player from entering the temple. A glowing silhouette of a red-haired girl flashed vividly in his memory. He clenched his metal fist with a crunch. Playing as the Devil Knight was unbearably difficult, but he liked it immensely. His lips spread into a predatory smile, because obstacles only fueled his excitement. Echoing footsteps bounced off the floor. True hardcore gamers do not look for easy paths. They live by a tough roleplay. Of course, any pompous image required real skill, like that top healer who calmly walked on water and made other players worship him over the dragon's corpse. Because if you are a weakling, no one will take you into the team, no matter how talentfully you play a pacifist monk among burned corpses. With such a cruel system, he will have to compete with helper bots all the way to the final. The knight pushed a massive door and decisively stepped into the cold semi-darkness. When everyone dispersed, he immediately got bored. A system window flashed before his eyes, demanding to find the hidden evil and talk to the bishop. He figured the plot would move forward only after the interrogation, and just as he was thinking about where to kill time, a loud shout rang out. Quick footsteps were heard behind. The red-haired priestess happily ran up to him and asked to go together. She suddenly stopped very close by. He squinted in surprise, not understanding her constant sudden appearances, and asked about the abandoned interrogation. The priestess calmly explained that the hero's attention would be too great an honor for the sectarian. Therefore, the archmage strictly ordered her to follow the devilish knight. He remembered the cunning smile of the white lioness, and irritably realized that the little one was simply pushed on to him. They walked down the alley, and the girl asked if he had any other business. He glanced at her sideways. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. Without stopping, he sarcastically asked if they only catch demons when all the information is served on a silver platter. The priestess girl opened her mouth in surprise, as if she had just been enlightened. She beamed with admiration and began showering compliments on his wisdom, while the hero nervously sweated. In reality, he just wanted to swing. He closed his eyes, quickly figuring out the system. In front of him stood a typical starter NPC, programmed to praise the player endlessly. It flashed through his mind that the dumpling turned out to be cute and talkative. The priestess joyfully squeezed her mace, radiating so much enthusiasm that in the hero's imagination, plump dumplings with little eyes were flying around her. But this crazy hyperactivity began to openly stress him out. For such a fierce introvert, such inexhaustible attention quickly became a trial. Meanwhile, the sun set, and the girl, businesslike, suggested heading to the Adventurers Guild, since asking passers-by in the dark was pointless. The hero listened silently. She continued chirping about how all sorts of orders flowed there. Throwing his weapon over his shoulder, the companion briskly went ahead, sincerely admiring how brilliantly he had planned everything for demon hunting. The hero trudged gloomily behind and mentally lamented that he couldn't just turn off this dialogue, although, deep down, this company didn't really annoy him that much. His main problem was different. The chosen pompous role of a cool loner simply physically did not allow him to be sweet with her. The real trouble came from an unexpected place. The main hero turned out to be an incurable hostage of his own roleplay. The cozy light from the open doors dispelled the night darkness. They came straight to the Adventurers Guild. The lioness thoughtfully closed her eyes. She could not have imagined that this institution could be used for their purposes. The book knowledge from her tower was no match for the cunning of an experienced mercenary. The young man with an eye patch flashed his badge at the counter and immediately got down to business. He needed tasks involving demons. The clerk rustled through the pages of the magazine and hesitantly asked if they would settle for just a suspicion of the monster. The boy roughly ordered to show everything they had, although the official warned the only such case had already been intercepted by the temple. A form slid across the table. 500,000 gallons for investigating a series of strange deaths with a terrible stench. The young man casually said that he had already dealt with it. A red-haired knight in temple armor silently approached the counter, while the lioness imagined with horror how the temple would appropriate their reward. The boy calmly inquired about rumors of disappearances without a trace or outbreaks of sudden rage. The companion interrupted the conversation, clarifying that even unverified gossip would do. Realizing that this colorful company had come together, the clerk nervously handed them an updated pass. The young man with glasses wearily advised the guests to investigate the rumors on their own or go to the Information Guild. But as soon as he saw the silver tokens of the Inquisitor and the sage from the magic tower in their hands, the tone instantly changed. The boy broke into a flattering smile and pressed his hands to his chest, promising to recall everything down to the smallest details. The young man with the eye patch cheerfully tugged him by the shoulder, openly amusing himself with the frightened clerk and his ruined night shift. The bespectacled boy hushed his voice and revealed the main detail. Pickpockets in the city had become significantly fewer. The white lioness werewolf frowned. Beggars also vanished without a trace from the streets, spawning rumors about an unknown plague in the slums. However, the clerk immediately disavowed these words, citing the unverified nature of the rumors. Suddenly, the red-haired inquisitor menacingly loomed over the counter. The boy even recoiled. A heavy fist slammed onto the tabletop with a crash. The inquisitor shouted wildly, raging at the very thought of sinners who dared to forget about God's mercy. His hand twitched from tension, earning him the apt nickname, Malicious Dumpling, from someone. While the red fanatic literally boiled with rage, puffing up like a hot dumpling, his companion, the swordsman, merely watched this hysteria impassively. The white-haired one cut in, saying this was an obvious pretext, and that other demons were definitely hiding in the city. The boy in glasses anxiously asked the temple to investigate this and immediately report all new details. He looked seriously at the tall lioness werebeast. The white-haired man, meanwhile, mentally scolded the bosses who piled on work in the middle of the night, and smiled maliciously. These were no longer his problem. He headed for the exit, glad that he was just a piece of data, not a driven office plankton. The one-eyed man threw over his shoulder that pocket thieves and beggars gathered in that quarter, and advised the Inquisitor to take a look there as well. Meanwhile, the red-haired priestess enthusiastically told the mentor that she intended to continue learning from him. She clenched her fist decisively. The girl rushed to the open door, fell to her knees, and desperately begged the Devil Knight to take her with him. The knight silently walked away down the dark corridor. Troubling thoughts spun in his head. The health loss mechanic in the temple smelled like a trap, so a serious fight with the locals was inevitable. The redhead sprang from her place and rushed after him, and he calmly strode forward, throwing the heavy sword over his shoulder. In the darkness, a black sphere silently sank. "How dare you!" the red-haired priestess shouted fiercely, raising a dazzling cross. The young man with the eye patch only sighed wearily, already pitying their enemy. He tensed. The upcoming cutscene would forever change this game, but he quickly dismissed his doubts as soon as a new system window popped up. The quest title, Ominous Omen, brought a nervous smile to his face. The priestess matched his pace and asked if the Devil Knight knew the way to the slums. Her green eyes shone with naive trust. The young man clicked his tongue irritably. The gathering places of scoundrels are the same everywhere. In fact, he intended to search for objectives on the map, but remained silent, allowing his companion to continue admiring him. The neon minimap was already dotted with red enemy markers. The silver-haired young man glanced suspiciously, uttering a brief, however. Next to him walked the red-haired priestess, complaining that such dirty places as the slums were completely unsuitable for her. A sinister shadow with a weapon slowly slid over the cobblestones. A silent question hung in the air. Will everything end well? As soon as they reached the dark, half-ruined buildings, trouble was in the air. The young man fiercely hissed the question of what he had just said, and the frightened interlocutor broke out in a cold sweat from terror. In front of them, in the semi-darkness, sat a bound, fat man, but his stubbornness turned out to be the least of their problems. The priestess decisively placed a heavy mace in front of the captive, demanding to swear by God and tell only the truth. She burst into a scream. The girl's eyes blazed with rage, and she menacingly loomed over the prisoner, with her weapon at the ready. She pressed the tip of the mace against his side and shouted wildly, "Are you sure the temple took them?" A semi-transparent map glowed before their eyes, densely dotted with red enemy markers. The trio silently moved through the dark cobblestone streets. The red-haired girl looked around warily. She sharply turned her head, feeling the ominous aura of this place. The young man ahead remained unshaken, fully aware of the crowd of monsters around. His gaze was cold and focused. He had calculated everything. The time had come. Suddenly, some passerby collided with him on the move. The stranger immediately recoiled and hastily apologized. Fear flashed across his pale face, but the young man swiftly grabbed the other's wrist, which was already clutching his wallet. He noted the boldness of the petty thief in an icy tone. "Cooperate, and you will keep your hand." The young man with the eye patch harshly twisted the thief, pressing her to the ground, and already in a moment he was proudly boasting that he had anticipated this scene in advance and prepared a pompous line. All thanks to experience. In games, the system always highlights the necessary characters. Therefore, in the crowd above this girl's head, he immediately noticed the green quest marker. She herself jumped into the trap as soon as he took out the wallet as bait. Realizing her failure, the thief grinned fiercely. In her head, at the sound of someone's footsteps, it flashed that she was unlucky. Above her suddenly loomed a red-haired priestess with a massive mace. The fanatic's eyes blazed with anger as she shouted about the divine commandment not to steal. Her verdict was brief. According to the sacred dogma, the thief must have her hand cut off. She was already about to strike, but a stranger's hand on her shoulder and a request not to act thoughtlessly stopped her. It was a calm, lion-like priest who intervened, before whom the redhead immediately began to justify her cruelty. Fierce dissatisfaction from the interrupted punishment was reflected on her face. The red-haired priestess froze with her mouth agape. The calm lioness merely closed her eyes and added that even the devilish knight once taught her mercy. In her story, this cruel warrior unexpectedly appeared as a wholly enlightened one, with a golden halo. She gently advised the priestess to calm her passion and learn humility. The girl confusedly grasped her heavy mace, bewildered by such a statement. The lioness's words made no sense in her head, but she resignedly nodded, although skepticism did not disappear. Meanwhile, the holy knight himself stood with an impassive face. He twitched from a strange feeling, as if somewhere he had just been equated to Buddha, and he barked irritably, demanding to stop wasting time. Someone tugged him by the shoulder, turning him back to the original goal. He unequivocally ordered to be taken to the one who controls all the pickpockets in this area. His gaze from beneath the bandage became sharp and cold. After all this long dragging, he finally tracked down the local leader. The convoy descended into the gloomy dungeon. The one-eyed swordsman, the beastman, and the priestess strictly led the bound captive. A light dust rose. Meanwhile, during the interrogation, the bald fat man swore in a cold sweat that their targets were taken by the temple. The priestess on the stairs decisively raised her shield and mace, stopping the squad. The bound boy grumbled discontentedly, refusing to understand the essence of their questioning. A sharp clarification sounded. Didn't the Inquisitors take those people for so-called re-education? The fat man was pierced by paralyzing horror when the massive tip of the mace pressed right into his chest. Blasphemy! The enraged priestess struck with the weapon with a swing, barely restraining her fury. She fanatically shouted that criminals could only be punished within the terms established by the Great Temple. Her face blazed with righteous anger. While she was outraged by the violation of the rules, the one-eyed man frankly did not understand how this bureaucracy could be their main problem. She sharply turned around and barked that nothing could be more important, making the lioness only wearily close her eyes. The swordsman frowned, suddenly realizing his mistake. Until now, he had perceived all this as a mere continuation of a minor side quest. Now the puzzle came together. He finally understood why in the plot branch of the Devil Knight, the temple unexpectedly came to the forefront. It seemed that the main plot started right here. The one-eyed warrior with two-colored hair gloomily loomed over his victim, holding a giant sword at the ready. He harshly ordered to lay out everything about the disappearance of people, and the frightened captive squeezed out that the visits began about a month ago. The swordsman approached him closely. Sweating coldly, the bald man told that the unknown acted quietly, taking 1 or 2 men at a time, like secret slave traders. His fingers nervously pinched the fabric of his pants as he panicked and began to justify that under no circumstances did he blame the Holy Temple for this. Suddenly, someone's staff pressed against the warrior's back, and he, with slight irony, stated that they had been exposed. The red-haired priest burst inside indignantly, demanding explanations. Following him, a figure in a luxurious blue mantle stepped smoothly into the room, instantly paying attention to the words about the abductions. The white lioness were-a-beast hovered over the trembling captive, coldly questioning the regularity of the disappearances. The man, stammering, confirmed that it happened 2 or 3 times a week. His eyes nearly popped out of their sockets in horror. He admitted that he knew the exact time of the Inquisitors' patrols, so he ordered his men not to wander the streets during those hours. The lioness slowly turned to the swordsman, her face petrified from the sudden realization of a terrible suspicion. The werebeast touched his face in shock upon hearing the unexpected words about gifts to the demon. An outraged voice demanded immediate explanations, flatly refusing to believe in these offerings. A heavy silence hung in the air. The red-haired woman could not hold back, and burst into a scream, defending the honor of the order from such accusations. The one-eyed swordsman only gave a crooked smile and called her words naive nonsense. He carelessly tapped his fingers on his leg. The girl clenched her fist until her knuckles turned white with anger, while he coldly finished her off with the truth. Reality does not depend on her belief. And the swordsman himself mentally spread into a satisfied smile. He adored watching how the hero's usual world was destroyed, forcing him to grow. He understood that for a child, this was a terrible blow, but it was precisely such trials that made character deep. Taking a heavy step forward, he sharply changed the subject and dryly asked where the people had been taken. The frightened bald informant panicked and pressed himself against the wall, justifying that he was only receiving reports here. A cunning shadow flashed across the swordsman's face. He looked with interest at the freckled girl, who did not run away despite her hands being untied, and she unexpectedly confessed that she knew the right person. Gathering the remains of courage, she frowned and resolutely added, "If it is about demons, one cannot remain silent." The man with the bandage sharply stepped on the conductor, making her shudder with horror. He menacingly loomed over the frightened girl, who barely squeezed out a scared stammer. The tension burst. He unexpectedly spread into a sincere smile and cheerfully praised her cleverness. A second, and his gaze became icy again. He gave her a stern order to lead them further. The girl clenched her teeth in rage and despair, but obediently moved forward. A hoarse caw echoed over the ruined roofs. Black ravens had already gathered around the fresh puddle of blood on the cobblestones. The group passed unflinchingly, by a huge beast that was tearing apart someone's corpse right on the street. The conductor led the strange company deeper into the dark city with fear. Stopping by the gloomy passage, she announced that the real slums begin right here. She strictly forbade them from drawing their swords. The locals here are too nervous, and any threat would prevent learning anything. Casting a wary glance over her shoulder at her companions, she cautiously stepped into the darkness. A warning was sounded that the local inquisitor cannot stand people from the temple. The red-haired priestess coldly cut in that she also does not intend to deal with thieves. She irritably snapped at the shout, while the white lion behind only sighed wearily. A sharp order was given not to do anything foolish, so that no one would suffer later. The dark-haired cat girl confusedly began to justify herself, saying she intervened only for mutual benefit. The swordsman with an eye patch mentally compared their quarrel to a fight between a cat and a bird. Cute. The girl dramatically turned away, denying any nervousness, while he seriously wondered if this NPC was scripted with a typical tsundere personality. However, in the world of beast people, such cat comparisons would be ignorance, so he remained silent, and the group moved on. They walked down the night street, completely unaware that they were already being watched. A green-haired stranger in a white cloak was intently watching them from the roof. With one smooth movement, he jumped down. A red system window instantly flashed before the swordsman's eyes. Enemy target within a 20-meter radius. A red system warning flashed. Enemy within a 20-meter radius. The swordsman with two-colored hair instantly drew a shining blue blade. "Hey, what are you doing? I told you not to draw the sword," his companion exclaimed indignantly. She sharply intercepted her own weapon, when suddenly a calm foreign voice interrupted them. The swordsman coldly squinted his single eye. The stranger advised to put away the blade if they did not want to fight, and against the backdrop of the night sky, a shadow flashed. The warrior sharply raised his head and saw a figure in a white cloak on the roof. Assessing the situation, he silently hid his weapon in the sheath. The green-headed youth sneered, pleased with how quickly the swordsman understood everything. From the powerful impact, a cloud of dust rose on the cornice. The cloak fluttered in the air as the stranger rapidly fell down. A silent landing, a green tail twitching fiercely from under the clothes. The guest straightened up, immediately recognizing his target by the two-colored hair and massive armored gauntlet. A dazzling flash cut through the white void. Two-colored hair and a black eye patch. The Devil Knight was recognized instantly. From the haze emerged a green-haired man in a white hood, bearing sharp teeth. He confidently greeted the knight. The red-haired youth and the lion-like beast-woman froze confusedly behind the swordsman. The knight gripped the hilt tighter. A thought was beating in his head. This character should not have been in the original story at all. He calmly threw the heavy blade over his shoulder and cut off that their acquaintance was purely one-sided. Attributing his recognizability to loud fame, the knight dryly asked about the purpose of the meeting. He slightly bowed his head and mockingly inquired whether the stranger expected praise for sharp eyesight. The shadow on the face under the hood thickened, and the smile became even wider. The emerald eye flashed ominously when the green-haired man stealthily asked what brought them here. The redhead suddenly burst out shouting, accusing the knight of conspiring with the clergy for the sake of kidnapping. Hearing the insult about the god's dogs, one of the nearby priests instantly boiled over. The black-haired girl waved her hands fearfully, assuring that the strangers came only to investigate the kidnappings. The warrior with the red armband mentally called the guests cats, while small animals nearby scowled discontentedly. He glanced confusedly at the man in the white hood, completely lost in their likeness. The girl dared to blurt out the main thing. Rumors say that a demon is involved in the disappearances. The green-haired one froze and asked in shock if the monster really takes children. The man's face twisted with hidden rage, and cold sweat ran down his temple. The white-haired swordsman with an eye patch calmly emphasized that they came from outside, as independent investigators, because the local temple is no longer trusted. The tall white beast-woman pleaded for cooperation to prevent new victims. The green-haired one silently drilled her with a heavy gaze. Finally, he took a step forward, sharply flicking his fluffy green tail. His eyes narrowed predatorily. He raised his bandaged hand and snapped his fingers sharply. A quiet order to report sounded, and the spy, hidden in the shadows, silently vanished into the stone alley. A figure in a white cloak moved through the dark alley. The black-haired young man confidently said he would go personally. He would save his own skin at any cost. The green-haired guide only nodded understandingly. At that moment, the quest window flashed before the team. They had to go where the people were kidnapped. The hero carefully studied the informer's back. This member of the Thieves' Guild seemed painfully familiar to him. The guide coldly ordered to follow him. He sharply turned around, warning that he would wait for no one. A lightning-fast dash into the darkness. The trio of seekers froze in the middle of the street. The lioness archmage wearily leaned on her staff, complaining about running around at her age. But she was not going to become a burden. The acceleration magic enveloped her boots with a bright blue glow. The red-haired companion joyfully thanked for the magic, and the hero mentally appreciated such a timely buff. His face became serious. Everything indicated the beginning of a truly large-scale task. He rushed as fast as he could down the night street, past the motionless figure in blue, feverishly wondering if he would make it before the end of the full immersion. The souls sparked, leaving a bright magical trail on the cobblestones. The system coldly concealed the percentage of time remaining. Under the light of the full moon, the townspeople calmly strolled through the night market. A light step from around the corner. A green-haired man in a white cloak led his group out of the shadows and confidently pointed forward. The red-haired girl nervously asked again if prisoners could really have been taken there. An energy trail, invisible to others, led further. The thread of magic broke just before the door of an ordinary vegetable shop, behind which a skillfully installed barrier was hidden. Levitia squinted intently nearby. The young man with an eye patch calmly acknowledged the other's high camouflage skills. The guide threw over his shoulder that the most powerful defense awaited them in the warehouse basement. At that very second, the quest to find the captives refreshed before the young man's eyes. The system finally confirmed they had come to the right place. The beast woman assessed the camouflage barrier as a minor obstacle, and the swordsman with the eye patch ironically added that there was no requirement to act quietly under the quest conditions. Having read the system tasked to find the kidnapped people, he briefly nodded and moved forward. His green-haired companion twitched fearfully. "Are you crazy?" the other blurted out. The young man panicked, insisting that noise would attract the guards, and anything could be waiting for them inside. The boot firmly stepped on a stone. The swordsman looked over his shoulder without emotion. He calmly remarked that kidnapping was a far more serious crime than ordinary trespassing, and he advised his partner to step back if he was scared. Drawing his weapon, he decisively headed straight to the enemy building. A clear and confident step. Although in reality, the guy was just terribly tired, and blurted out the first pompous nonsense that came to mind. Approaching the target, he only mentally prayed that these local NPCs would follow him, and his companions did indeed follow behind. The guide in the white hood wiped the sweat, sincerely amazed at the recklessness of the companion he had known for barely a week. The white lioness only smiled softly, clutching the shining staff. In the green eyes of the red-haired inquisitor, there was respect. She saw in him a person with real skills and iron convictions. The gaze slid over the priest's stern collar. Her hand clenched the silver mace with a crunch. Only yesterday they had arrested a real contractor with a demon in the temple. She sharply turned to the guide. The worst suspicion struck below the belt. What if the temple itself made a deal with the monsters? The inquisitress gloomily hid her face behind the shield, assuming the worst. The servants are gathering bloody sacrifices. There was no time, so they threw it straight to the guide. If you're afraid, hide. Your role here is done. She briskly passed by him. Hard steps echoed on the cold floor. The lioness followed, praising the inquisitress for the depth of her thoughts. With shield and mace at the ready, the girl confidently walked on, admitting that she understood everything, thanks to the actions of the devilish knight. The guide remained standing alone, silently watching them disappear into the semi-darkness of the corridor. The green-haired beastman desperately grabbed his head, not understanding how anyone could go there without any preparation. His gaze flashed with grim realization. With such partners, he definitely would not die of old age. Turning around, he suddenly took off and ran away. Meanwhile, a heavy boot stepped on vegetables scattered on the floor, and an echo carried a quiet call to the guys. The young man with a white streak and an eye patch asked the emptiness and disappointment whether they really would not come. He stood in the middle of the wrecked room with a bare sword, and before him, on their knees, already sat two bound captives in black, and he had not even managed to descend into the basement yet. A sudden moment of lure. The swordsman with a pointer by the board clearly explained that massive, beast-like creatures and people only with animal ears are two completely different races. The air was torn by the sharp sound of a strike. The door flew off its hinges, and at the top of the stairs appeared a swordsman with black and white hair. Calmly throwing the blade over his shoulder, he examined the discovered underground passage. The atmosphere hinted at the proximity of the boss. While the companions behind blinked in amazement, the swordsman had already cleared the entire level on his own. The green-haired mage in a white cloak smiled nervously, dripping with cold sweat. The young man irritably said that they should get out if they were scared, but they panicked and asked to wait. The red-haired warrior woman with a shield rushed after him as fast as she could. He descended unflinchingly into the semi-darkness of the dungeon. Suddenly, the swordsman froze in surprise. A strange, anxious tickle of unknown force ran through the body. The warrior woman tensed and exclaimed that a powerful demonic energy was striking from below, and they needed to hurry. She sharply turned to the rest of the team. The mages did not waste a second, and instantly activated the acceleration spell. Blue runes flashed underfoot, and the swordsman ironically caught himself thinking that, for the first time in this game, he was participating in a team battle. The young man with the eye patch frowned intently. Stepping onto the magical stairs, he wondered how realistically the game would reproduce the behavior of his new companions. The four moved up the shining path in unison. He optimistically thought that he was looking forward to this. However, reality met them only with a dark, junk-strewn descent. His gaze slid over the scattered vegetables on the floor, when suddenly a clink sounded. The system notified about entering the hidden dungeon, Somon. Quick run-up. The squad swiftly flew into the portal. A sharp lunge forward. The magical castle shattered into purple shards from the precise strike. Wooden fragments rumbled down. The young man kicked down the massive door, dramatically bursting into the room at the head of his squad. One of the cultists panicked and screamed. The partner desperately clung to him. The summoning ritual was still ongoing. Retreat was not an option. The red-haired evil cursed, swearing at such an untimely visit. A blinding flash tore the space. From the darkness came a muffled voice calling the hero. The green-haired warrior tensed, while the white beastman nearby did not even open his eyes. Forward stepped the one-eyed swordsman, wrapped in crimson lightning. The air trembled from a powerful energy discharge. The redhead raised a shining symbol and screamed wildly, begging to win just a little more time. The wounded sectarian curled up in hysteria, in a puddle of his own blood. Shadows thickened, and a thunderous voice baptized those present as slaves of hell. A huge magical skull, with a burning eye, crashed into the floor with a rumble. With screeching and sparks, it rushed straight at the enemies. Giant skeletons in a violet haze loomed over the heroes. The system identified the enemies as lesser demons, formed from dark energy. The exhausted allies sighed heavily and asked to buy time to prepare a spell. The green-haired youth sharply turned, intercepting the weapon. The red-haired knight fiercely shouted that God was with her. She charged into the attack with her shield raised, but the one-eyed swordsman was already rushing beside her. His surviving eye gleamed fiercely. One swift strike, and a colossal violet wave instantly swept the skeletons off the path. A magical slash cut through the darkness. The boy calmly looked back over his shoulder and declared that he would not yield his place in the vanguard. The female knight was stunned. Her face flushed, and she exclaimed that he was incredible, but that was already too much. The girl nervously clenched her mace. With a determined look, the redhead stated that despite her lack of experience, she would also be useful. She slammed her heavy shield forward with a crash, for her main task was to protect the vanguard at all costs. With a battle cry, the girl flew into the thick of it, scattering enemies to pieces with a single sweeping mace strike. The swordsman behind only sighed irritably. The system gave him no experience for the monsters she killed. He calmly chopped through another skeleton, when suddenly a voice from the darkness promised him flesh and blood. The young man sharply raised his eyes. He immediately understood everything. The stranger called death upon these lands, and red Draugr signs instantly flashed before his eyes. The dark mage raised his hands, summoning from the shadows an entire army of snarling undead. The wounded sorcerer fiercely bared his teeth, cursing Gretchen for her betrayal. He ordered the swordsman to be sacrificed first, but the latter met the black magic clouds with an absolutely indifferent gaze. Gigantic shadow spikes mercilessly crashed down right on him. From the furious pressure, the young man was sharply thrown backward, sliding on the floor with his boots. His companions froze in panic, shouting the name of their knight in horror. The red-haired woman sharply looked back. From the shadow, the Devil Knight looked at her. His whirlwind of purple magic was already grinding the skeleton army to bones. The girl shouted that she would save them, and struck the ground with a golden mace, raising a wave of light. But the dark vortex easily withstood the attack. The priestess froze. The knight with the eye patch smiled confidently. He was exactly waiting for this. He drew his sword, ready to wipe out everyone with one strike. Purple energy thickly enveloped the blade. A powerful explosion of darkness shattered the stone floor into pieces. The red-haired girl barely managed to hide behind the shield, blocking a direct hit. She was breathing heavily, shocked by the inhuman strength of the enemy. The crack of her shield drowned in the darkness. "Gretchen!" the young man shouted in despair, looking at the white-haired swordsman, around whom dark magic was already swirling. The warrior froze in a dense, bloody haze. In his eye, the pitiful figure of the boy was clearly reflected. At this gaze, the young man hysterically whimpered, shedding bloody tears. The gigantic skull roared the order to kill him quickly. The swordsman sharply swung the blade, tearing the space with a violet flash, while someone pitifully begged to spare his life. Overcome by animal panic, the young man in the cloak rushed to flee through the crowd. He collided at full speed with someone in the darkness, and heard a quiet warning that he was not allowed there. "Go to the very depths of hell," the icy voice cut through the noise. The white-haired warrior raised a cold, merciless gaze. He coldly threw them a single word: insects. A colossal wave of black-purple energy instantly swept away the enemies, tearing their bodies to pieces. A deadly flash engulfed everything around. The young man in the cloak remained motionless, lying in a puddle of his own blood on the broken stone floor. A blond young man lay breathless, in a puddle of his own blood, against the backdrop of a huge crimson seal. Someone slowly approached closer, stepping with a heavy boot right into the bloody mess. It was him, with disheveled hair and a burning gaze, in which a cold emptiness was frozen. The air vibrated with a dreadful hum of energy, and then everything drowned in dead silence. It flashed through his mind that he was already certain he would die. The exhausted young man with an eye patch was breathing heavily, dripping with cold sweat. A short but fierce battle ended. The system incessantly sent notifications about health loss, while he hastily applied a new healing skill. The black aura continued to swirl underfoot. He glanced over the bloodied haul and his sword, frankly, wondering where such a powerful ability came from right at the start of the game. Joy instantly faded. If the game hands out such overpowered bonuses from the start, then a hellish difficulty awaits ahead, and curses will fly by themselves. He sharply looked back to check on his team. Meanwhile, someone's hand clenched the blazing mace with a crunch. The red-haired paladin with a massive white shield rushed into the very flame. His eyes burned with wild determination to fulfill his duty to the end. A golden explosion tore through the battlefield. A devastating blow from a swing struck directly in the enemy's face. Throwing the monster back, the redhead roared about divine punishment and desperately shouted to the mage, demanding to act faster and not test his patience. The blonde werewoman sharply turned to her partner in the white cloak. A predatory smile appeared on her face. It was time for her to make her contribution to the fight. Fingers firmly gripped the shaft of the magical staff. A powerful burst of blue energy tore the space apart. Raising her weapon upwards, she shouted to the allies to take care of their own safety. Magic struck from the skies. A gigantic pillar of blue flame crashed into the ground, sweeping away absolutely everything around. Above the raging fire, her order to destroy evil was heard. The enemies screamed in pain, burning alive in unbearable heat. Even the undead did not survive. The skeletons melted and crumbled to ashes under their own desperate wails. And only the swordsman with an eye patch stood completely calmly in the very center of the fiery hell, looking indifferently at the charred bodies at his feet. He only looked away confusedly, hoping that no one heard his accidental thoughts aloud. Meanwhile, the lioness and the green-haired boy landed right in front of him, sarcastically greeting such a respected person. The boy slyly squinted from under his hood and boldly asked if that was all. The red-haired comrade looked around the cleared room and suggested taking at least some of the enemies alive. The knight with the eye patch responded with grim silence. He moved forward, just found one suitable. A heavy boot splashed into a thick puddle of blood. On the floor, a pink-haired young man screamed wildly, with bloody tears on his face. Choking, he croaked a powerless threat. The armored hand sharply dropped. The knight roughly lifted the enemy by his clothes and ordered the worm to be silent. With undisguised disgust, he hissed that he has no name that these scoundrels dare to pronounce. Suddenly, the beaten prisoner grimaced horribly. A sharp wheeze tore from his bloodied lips, and in a moment, the young man was already bursting into mad laughter, right in the face of his executioner. The knight froze, hearing the joyful cry that everything was going according to his plan. The prisoner admitted himself a worthless worm, but threw a sinister warning at the end. The bloodied hand, with its last strength, reached upward with a death rattle. Our king still, trembling in the light, the fingers slowly unclenched, is waiting for you. Silence. Only blood flowed down the cold walls of the temple. Heavy drops echoed as they shattered on the crimson-stained floor amidst the ruins. The red-haired girl turned pale with horror and screamed, warning the Devil Knight of danger. From behind the cover, she helplessly watched the back of the white-haired warrior standing amid the bloody slaughter. The knight tensed, Suddenly, a wave of furious demonic energy struck from somewhere. He had just finished off the enemy with his sword, when a giant, magical seal flared beneath them, scorching the ground with bursts of red lightning. The knight raised his head in shock. A deafening roar tore through the space. A powerful blast wave simply knocked him off his feet and threw him into the air. A dazzling crimson flash engulfed everything around. From above, a colossal burning cross crashed down on the knight. Hellish flames imprinted him into the shattered floor, leaving no chance for survival. The red-haired warrior woman asked anxiously if he was intact, but the young man with a bandage on his eye sarcastically retorted if she had lost her mind. He groaned painfully and grabbed his neck, lamenting that even reduced sensitivity to pain did not save him from the hellish ache in his back. The green-haired boy with the pale priestess on his back only laughed nervously at all this absurdity. A gigantic dragon burst out of the dazzling fire with a deafening roar. A system window flashed before his eyes. It was Naker, a water demon that devours people and has deadly poisonous fangs. The young man squinted fiercely. Since there was no quest to disrupt the summoning, this battle was inevitable. A sharp whistle. In the darkness, a terrifying fang-filled maw opened. A piercing screech tore through the air. The demon rushed downward in a cloud of violet energy. The huge carcass covered the team with a continuous destructive wave. Someone firmly stepped into the flames and commanded everyone to hide. Comrades gasped in shock as the space around them exploded with magical light. The red-haired girl jumped to intercept the blow, shielding the team with her gigantic white shield. The red-haired girl desperately begged for the strength not to bow before evil, raising the massive shield. At that very moment, a giant fiery maw crashed down from the sky. The girl took the hellish blow upon herself, firmly bracing her feet against the ground. From the fierce pressure, the stone beneath her boots cracked and shattered into pieces. She screamed at the top of her lungs, holding back the monster's assault with her last strength. A dazzling stream of flames tried to reduce her to dust. While the tank heroically held back death, her comrades calmly stood behind in complete safety. The blond young man only smiled, impressed by such impenetrable strength. Although in his mind, he sincerely did not understand why it was necessary to take the attack head-on, when he could have simply dodged. But the green-haired boy in the hood broke out in a cold sweat. He feverishly begged the mage to find the creature's weak spot, while the girl bought them time. It turned out that before them was the demon Naker, armed with poisonous fangs. The blonde damager squinted fiercely. Since they had arranged such a perfect defense, it was his turn to act. The boot stepped heavily into a puddle of blood. The damager also had to do his job. The swordsman coldly said that the blow should be to the head, and went into a sharp lunge. "Head!" the lioness screamed hysterically, and tightly closed her eyes. But the blade whistled past her, cutting the enemy ahead with a powerful red flash. The blade deeply cut into the flesh. The sound of a sharp strike. The swordsman's eye fiercely flashed with violet light. Attack of the destroyer. The red-haired youth froze when hot blood splashed right onto him. The beastman and his partner comically gawked at the bloody fountain that erupted right before their noses. A crimson downpour drenched everything completely. The swordsman froze in the middle of this mess. Then he blinked in confusion and muttered something bewildered. Only question marks hung over the battlefield. A deafening roar tore through the space. A huge green dragon collapsed dead, and behind it stood a calm, white-haired swordsman. The wounded companion spat out blood and screamed frantically, not believing that the creature's steel scales were pierced with a single strike. Two others simply froze in silent shock, covered in ash and blood. Usually, players loved to fight such bosses, long and methodically. They enjoyed calculating damage to different body parts, rather than seeing the head fly off with the very first blow. The swordsman calmly lowered his weapon, while the carcass scattered golden sparks. He himself was surprised. In the original, this monster never died so quickly. Suspecting a hidden phase, the hero tensed, and did not take his eyes off the dead man. A barely audible exhale. Suddenly the surviving dragon tail sliced through the air with a whistle. The space exploded with a dazzling bloody flash. The one-eyed youth flinched and called out to his master with concern. The green-haired feline werebeast froze in panic, unable to react in time. The blade whistled, reminding to watch the blind spot. The werebeast awkwardly admitted that he was staring at the severed head, which caused the youth to have ironic thoughts about the naivety of local NPCs. He exhaled with relief, while the one-eyed man calmly passed by. Heavy boots softly stepped into a puddle of fresh blood. The young man suddenly stopped and looked closely at the rescued one. The guess struck instantly. This design perfectly matched the official appearance of a uniquely specialized bandit. Noticing this predatory look, The beast-man nervously swallowed and began mumbling excuses, preparing to flee as quickly as possible. But the young man stepped up close, forcing him to recoil and stammer in fear. Putting thoughts of recruitment aside for later, the one-eyed man grabbed the red sword. First, he had to finish off the vile creature. From the stump of the fallen monster's neck, a bloody fountain still burst forth. The system issued a warning about the demon's last desperate attack and ordered to strike its true, vulnerable spot. Well versed in the lore, the young man did not waste time on explanations and swiftly launched into the final rush. He raised the crimson sword right in the middle of the fiery storm. The main weakness of this monster was hidden in the so-called reverse scale. This piece of armor, which grew in the opposite direction, had long been a deadly vulnerability of Eastern dragons. The giant lizard fiercely loomed over him, blazing with bloody eyes. In the game Legend of Heroes, such bosses also had this hidden flaw. However, the scale did not appear immediately. First, it was necessary to knock out a lot of health from the monster. Absurdly resilient, the young man said coldly. His eye flashed with a violet aura. The game was over. Instead of a spectacular strike right on target, he chose brute force. Activated Earth Strike. A gigantic violet energy blade crashed down with a wild crunch. The young man did not even blink. A surprised scream sounded, and the space was torn apart by a powerful shockwave. Two companions froze in shock, gazing spellbound at his unshakable back. A heavy rumble shook the ground. The stone floor was thickly soaked with fresh blood. The one-eyed young man stood amid the destruction, breathing out tiredly and irritably. Suddenly, the space was torn by a powerful golden flash. He stunnedly lowered the bloody blade, not understanding what the hell had just happened. The swordsman had clearly planned to use the skill of a destructive strike on the ground. He put all his last points exactly there. There simply was not enough resource left for a piercing strike. But the game strangely issued exactly that attack, the absence of which he regretted. Thoughts about a possible bug were suddenly interrupted by a desperate scream. The red-haired girl knocked down the bound traitor face down and offered the knight to personally execute him. Her eyes were insanely burning with rage. Deciding to deal with the game system after the quest, the young man coldly said that they had not finished with everyone. Their main target was still breathing. The black cloak sharply flashed in the air. The swordsman heavily moved towards the frightened captive, promising to check how much of his anger he could endure. The prisoner thrown to the ground cried out in horror as a crimson blade approached his face. The one-eyed swordsman coldly said that he was also extremely interested in learning the truth. However, the lion-like priest sharply cut him off, ordering the devilish knight to finish the victim quickly and cleanly. The temple needed evidence, and this captive babbled too much. The knight gloomily loomed over the terrified young man. He only spat irritably, a short, and the sword swiftly sliced through the air. The prisoner's head flew off in a fountain of blood, while the priest urged, in a matter-of-fact tone, to execute the rest. The beheaded body heavily fell at the executioner's feet. Suddenly, someone's unexpected voice rang out. The priest and the red-haired priestess turned in surprise to the stranger. Before them stood a green-haired beast man, who firmly declared that they would take one of the prisoners alive. Around, in puddles of blood, lay dozens of bodies, his dead comrades and relatives. He decisively moved forward, demanding to grant the survivors the right to their own revenge and a dignified farewell to the fallen. The green-haired beastman gloomily froze, listening to the conversation. The red-haired priestess dryly cut in, saying that the law forbids personal revenge, so instead they would hold only a memorial service. The white-haired warrior turned away irritably. Prayers in the very temple where their families were killed sounded like mockery, despite all the excuses about apostates. A lightning-fast swing and splashes of blood. Two in black cloaks fell dead, and immediately someone's boots approached their bodies. While this slaughter unfolded, the priestess continued a boring lecture about future thorough inspections. She fervently promised to honor the victims, but was interrupted by a mocking question, whether they intended to bury them together with demon worshippers, branding them as thieves. The beastman snarled and reminded about the inevitable lawful punishment for theft. He loomed over the priestess, accusing her that the church was covering up the appropriation of others' property with the souls of the innocently killed. Suddenly his face twisted in shock. A devastating blow threw the beastman backward, right before the stunned priestess's eyes. He painfully crashed to the floor, spitting blood, and heard a brief order to take what was his. The white-haired man calmly explained, if they acted strictly by the law, they would never have tracked down these sectarian worms. With these words, he cast one last cold glance over his shoulder. The young man with the eye patch coldly warned, If the demon escapes, the interlocutor will pay with his own head. The green-haired beastman tensely reported that this would never happen under any circumstances. At that moment, an interface popped up before his eyes with a new task: to clear out the enemies and find traitors in the temple. The swordsman slung his weapon over his shoulder, noting with satisfaction that the main quest was finally coming to an end. The red-haired companion glanced at him suspiciously, while he mentally justified his behavior as role-playing and planned to win her favor. The body ached unbearably, even despite the lowered pain settings, so now the boy dreamed only of a hot shower and a real bed. With a relaxed smile, he commanded the system to exit the game. The space was torn by the sharp sound of a system error. His eyes widened in shock. Seeing the message about the impossibility of the action, he panicked and shouted the exit command once again. The system again displayed a solid red refusal screen. The boy froze in the middle of the virtual world, slowly realizing his situation. His face twisted in horror. What? Hung confusedly in the darkness. The swordsman with a two-handed sword on his back stood opposite the red-haired priestess and activated the exit from the game twice. A sharp system beep sounded. A cascade of red windows with refusal to execute the command instantly popped up before his eyes. The youth froze. He stared dumbfounded at the system messages. Cold sweat ran down his face, and absolute chaos reigned in his mind. The error of exiting virtual reality simply did not fit into his mind. He feverishly convinced himself that this was only a temporary block due to being in the dungeon, because otherwise such a scandalous bug would definitely destroy the game. His inner panic was interrupted by the priestess, who cautiously addressed him as the Devil Knight. She anxiously asked if he saw anything in front of him. The girl looked confused at his sudden stupor. Suddenly her eyes sharply widened. The lion-like beastman grimly explained to his red-haired companion, usually those possessed by a parasitic demon instantly lose their mind and become mindless zombies. But this young man somehow suppressed the monster, kept a clear mind, and even mastered its power for himself. A cold glow softly struck upward. The priestess tensed. Her fingers clenched the handle of the heavy mace until white. She suddenly shuddered when the knight with two-colored hair silently moved past her. The girl confusedly called after him, asking where he was going. The knight cast a shining blue eye at her and coldly cut off, saying he is coming to punish the sinners who conspired with the demon. The darkness around seemed to thicken. While the warrior walked heavily towards the exit, the werebeast anxiously asked if she felt a demonic aura from him. The priestess shook her head in denial. There was dark energy, but not strong enough to raise alarm. The knight relentlessly strode forward, currently fighting an invisible internal battle with the monster inside his body. The girl decisively intercepted the weapon, suspecting that their ally was indeed in serious trouble. The white-haired priestess thoughtfully admitted that it was too early to draw conclusions about their companion, even though they were traveling together. The bound werebeast shrugged, replying that he did not seem like a talker, and immediately received praise for his sharp eyesight. The boy grinned smugly, proudly calling himself a petty thief who earns a living through attentiveness. Suddenly, an angry red-haired inquisitor flew out from the side and scolded him amid the ominous hissing of shadow cats. The priestess only barely smiled. She coldly advised to kill the contractor with the demon and take the body if the Inquisition does not plan to restrain him with divine power. The bound thief silently listened, as she pondered whether a severed tongue and cut tendons could save from the unique demonic magic. Someone's boot heavily stepped into a puddle of blood, and the priestess promised in a matter-of-fact tone to finish off the captive by dawn, and sent the Inquisitor upstairs. The red-haired woman shuddered from surprise and hastily agreed. The girl sharply turned around. She silently began to ascend the long, dark stairs toward the light. Her eyes blazed with determination, and her fingers clenched into a fist with force. In her thoughts, she fervently begged the higher powers to guide the sinner onto the true path. On the table in the rays of light lay fresh fruits and gathered herbs. Nearby, fluffy dough and bunches of greens were warming. The sun slowly set over the bustling trading district of Somon. Through the crowd between the stalls, a colorful group of 4 travelers walked unhurriedly. The beastman caught up with the swordsman and quietly said that thieves never forget an insult. And then he raised his gaze and added that they remember good just as firmly. The boy swore to definitely repay for the rescue, but the swordsman, with a slight smile, cut off that it was unnecessary. The beastman stubbornly stood his ground. The hero only waved irritably and moved on, asking to close the topic. Suddenly, a red system window with a command error flashed before his eyes, making him mentally howl in despair. The game brazenly displayed a quest about traitors in the temple, while the swordsman fiercely begged for this damned system to just release him. Realizing that the artificial intelligence was blocking the system again, he sighed resignedly and commanded exit aloud. His tired gaze showed dull despair. He had already hammered this button in the settings hundreds of times, but the game held him inside firmly. The finger clad in armor pressed the exit button, but the system suddenly issued a refusal. Red windows with error messages began to multiply before his eyes, one after another. Cold sweat poured over his face. If he could not log out, what would happen to his real body? At home he lived alone, worked as a freelancer, so colleagues definitely would not rush to look for him. Friends also think that he is just hanging out in the new game, and hardly anyone will come to check his locked apartment. And that meant that his physical body would simply die in the gaming capsule, without a nutrient solution. Suddenly his eyes flashed with hope. He remembered the built-in safety features of the device. In case of critical failures, each capsule had a hardware rescue system. He took a deep breath and commanded to launch the emergency protocol. The boy strained his voice, demanding the immediate forced shutdown of the virtual machine. In response, the merciless red failure window flashed again, and he grabbed his head in panic. Despair squeezed his throat. A loud three-story curse tore through the space. His scream echoed into the void. An invisible voice hysterically begged the system for exit and forced termination. Someone wildly cursed the game, while confusedly demanding explanations from the frozen Devil Knight. The red-haired girl burst out, demanding to know what was happening to all of them. An armed guard stormed into the courtyard with a crash due to the commotion. The girl was paralyzed by fear. If the knight lost control now, a massacre would begin. She nervously bit her lip. Only now did it fully dawn on her. She still did not know so much about the rules of this world. Suddenly, the girl sharply looked around. A black cloak flashed in the air. A lightning-fast dash cut across the square. A powerful burst of energy made her flinch and instinctively cover her face with her hand. The devilish knight convulsively clawed at his own face. His eye wildly blazed, releasing pure madness. Blood splattered in the darkness. Tishu was torn apart by a sharp order to come to his senses. At that very moment, a massive cross flew with full force into the boy's face, breaking his nose to blood. He staggered back, blinking in shock and not understanding why the red-haired priestess suddenly attacked him. She calmly stated that one blow was clearly not enough to knock him down. From the unbearable pain in his head, a panic suspicion flashed through the boy. Could it be that the plot suddenly broke, and this girl actually worships demons? He mentally cursed the faulty pain settings, shuddering from the throbbing blow and vainly searching for logic in her actions. Instead, the priestess suddenly smiled warmly, sincerely glad that his right hand had finally calmed down. The boy confusedly wiped the bloody mess, shocked by her words about some inner demon that supposedly tried to break out. The girl decisively grabbed her weapon. He froze in confusion, pressing the armored hand to his chest, and having no idea what she even meant. The priestess exclaimed inspiredly that she did not doubt him for a single drop. She firmly struck her fist against her chest. Her green eyes shone with unwavering faith that he would definitely overcome this evil and never give up. With a loud thud striking the cross on the ground, she called to fully trust her if a similar attack ever happened again. He firmly grabbed the shaft, sparking sparks. In the very epicenter of the flame, the red-haired priestess desperately shouted that she would buy him time at any cost. Her fingers clenched the cross with a crunch. The young man with an eye patch froze in confusion, not understanding why the lady mage suddenly staged this drama. He leaned expectantly toward the white-haired woman. She maintained a completely stone-faced expression. The context was clear, but this sudden pathos was confusing. A suspicion flashed in his mind. They were simply delivering scripted game lines, completely ignoring his words. The puzzle came together. While he was fiddling with the exit game button, the demon in his hand tried to break free. The palm was covered with black claws, emitting a creepy purple aura under an otherworldly whisper. A painful memory of a shadow that almost seized his body flashed before his eyes. Because of one senseless mistake, the entire dive went awry, and it was wildly irritating. He dismissed the jokes and sharply cut in, demanding an answer right now. The white-haired woman silently turned around and walked away, rustling her long dress. The lion-like woman anxiously asked if his right hand was really okay. The knight stood with his back to her, holding a massive sword on his shoulder. His eye flashed irritably. He abruptly turned around and asked if they had now decided to become hypocrites. The woman lowered her gaze conciliatorily and admitted that they were simply afraid of the power he was suppressing within himself. The knight dryly cut in that he would just continue killing demons. From over his shoulder, he cast a fierce glance, adding that he absolutely did not care about their opinions. His palm cracked as it clenched his own forearm. He reminded that he endures their company only for the sake of hunting demons, and instead of empty chatter, it would be better to kill one more. He walked away, but a biting phrase struck him in the back. "Won't you yourself become that demon, Devil Knight?" Her blue eye coldly squinted. The knight abruptly stopped and meaningfully extended the pause. "That will not happen, Lady Archmage." He smiled sarcastically, meeting their gaze. A massive shield with a cross hit the ground with a dull thud. The red-haired priestess firmly stated that she completely trusts the mind and will of the Devil Knight. She reminded that you won't become perfect on your own, so it is so important to rely on each other. Picking up her weapon, the girl smiled warmly. Their shared path definitely made sense. Her eyes shone with sincerity. She promised not to retreat and always be nearby. The knight turned around and walked away, muttering dully that he would hold on. The priestess watched him with her gaze, adding that she would wait until he comes to his senses. Bathed in sunlight, the warrior suddenly stopped. He exhaled heavily, and quietly noted that her problem with her eyes had not been resolved. The priestess blinked in surprise, assuring that she had no vision injuries. From behind her back, a beastman silently stepped out with a staff, and calmly explained that the knight was worried not about physical wounds at all. Not wanting to listen further, the knight sprang from his place and fled, ignoring the girl's indignant cries. He stared stunned at the floor, not understanding how he had earned such boundless trust from barely acquainted people. Stranger's armored gauntlets formed a heart above his head, and the boy blushed to his ears. Like a true otaku, he was ready to give them his soul. Overwhelmed by emotions, he suddenly dashed forward. The knight rushed towards the sunlit city, mentally cursing the broken exit button from the game. Behind him, the Archmage Beastman and the red-haired Inquisitor watched disapprovingly, not wanting to run again. The lioness's eyes narrowed. She looked hard at her companion, testing her resolve. The Inquisitor replied seriously, "The knight's power surpasses everything seen before, but remains extremely unstable." She asked directly if they would be able to stop the boy, if the demon finally broke free. The Archmage resignedly admitted that she had no plan for such a case. The lioness shifted her gaze to the Inquisitor, noticing her deep anxiety. The woman grimly confessed. A moment ago she saw true fear in the eyes of the Devil Knight. Meanwhile, a dark aura was already ominously swirling behind his back. The infected hand poisoned the mind, and the boy was covered in cold sweat, clinging with his last strength to the remnants of inner light. The red-haired priestess stood in despair, bitterly realizing evil penetrates too deeply, and she did not even have the strength to cleanse his hand. She helplessly lowered her head. Saving his soul was also beyond her power. They were not even fitting words of comfort, and yet she desperately sought to somehow ease the fear of the Devil Knight. Fingers clenched into the hilt of the mace until it cracked. The girl firmly decided to believe in the humanity he had reflected in the demon. From now on, she would protect his will with her own strength. Beside her, her mighty companion stood motionless. The Beastman only exhaled calmly and drawn out. Together they moved down the sunlit street, ready to do at least something for the common victory. Meanwhile, the system issued a sinister warning. Ahead was a march to the temple, and the inevitable search for traitors. And the hero himself stood relaxed with a sword behind his back, beaten, defiant, and as always ready to cause trouble. Behind the green leaves, a majestic temple peeked out under the clear blue sky, but the idol was shattered by a system window. A sinister task arrived to find traitors right within the holy walls. Inside the temple, calm sunlight poured through the stained glass dome. Behind the main pulpit sat a red-haired inquisitor, while anxious rumors spread through the hall, whom the deputy had brought to the sanctuary. The priests nervously glanced at the gloomy swordsman with an eye patch, who was calmly propping the door. Whispers spread through the crowd that the stranger did not even think of hiding his demonic aura. Suddenly, a deafening blow. Someone's hand forcefully struck the podium with a heavy rod, silencing the audience completely. The Inquisitor tightly gripped his weapon and dryly asked if everyone was present. The blonde cleric nervously swallowed and reported that there was still no contact with the seven brothers. The red-haired man's eyes flashed predatory green. The rest would be enough for him. A heavy aura covered the hall as cold words sounded. By the authority of the Inquisition, the court is officially opened. The clerics froze in horror, utterly crushed by this sudden pressure. Above the red-haired warrior, carrying a massive shield with a cross on his back, It was declared that the sins of each would be tested. The gray werewolf gripped the magical staff tighter. The innocent would surely gain freedom. The one-eyed swordsman mockingly slung his blade over his shoulder, waiting for those who dared to call themselves servants of God. The youth with crimson hair suddenly froze. In the dim light, his white priest's collar gleamed a moment, and his eyes flashed fiercely with gold, and his teeth bared in wild rage. He growled that a just judgment awaited all the wicked. With a loud clang, a blood-red system window popped up before his eyes. The new quest ordered to find and eliminate the traitors. The swordsman barely twitched his ear, listening to the sound. Only one thought beat in his head. What is the point of this task at all? Lowering his armor-clad arm, he calmly squared his shoulders, ready to go to the end.